Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Dan-Mabry Project. I am currently in Denver, Colorado. That is there it is, the Colorado Rockies Stadium. I'm at my friend Sydney Ald's apartment right now. He's going to be here for a couple more days before he heads down to Alabama to start a new career. Very thankful for him to allow me to be here for a couple hours and use some good internet. This episode is with someone I've been looking forward to talking to for a very long time, Alex P. Solome, aka Bro Loam. I've been following him on Instagram for a long time, and he's a very talented guy, very, very intelligent, very witty, and I just really enjoy the content that he produces and the t-shirts that he produces. And we talk about his story a little bit, how he ended up in Denver and ended up in Colorado. And then we get more into Dead and Company tour, I guess I should say. He went on summer tour this past summer and went to every stop, and he kind of summarized a little bit of his trip and some of the things that happened along the way and the people that he's met and the people that he's connected with, and just trying to continue to build this culture, this whole bootleg t-shirt Grateful Dead subculture that is really exploding for the past couple years. So, very thankful for Alex and his hospitality, allowing me in his home and getting to hang out with him and do the podcast. So, if you want to support me, the easiest way to do so is to subscribe to this podcast. Subscribe to it on YouTube. Subscribe to it on whatever listening platform you're listening to currently. If you find monetary value in this podcast, I do have a Patreon page that I'll leave a link down in the description below. If you want to, so much as buy me a cup of coffee a month, you can do it there. I got Venmo, Cash App, all that other stuff. If you want to reach out to me, hit me up on Instagram. It's probably the easiest way to get in contact with me, at Dan.Mabry. Follow Alex at Bro Loam. He'll be having some new shirts coming out this summer, I'm sure. Thank you for joining us here, and thank you for all the support so far. Hope to continue this adventure and keep meeting new people. So if you want to be on this podcast, if you know somebody that should be on this podcast, hit me up. I am constantly looking for new guests. Thanks, guys. I just would just really nothing crazy intro here or anything. Alex P. Solome, aka Bro Loam.
Present.
Alex is one of these people I've met through Instagram and been following for a while now. Wearing his t-shirt actually. I guess maybe 3 or 4 years ago, my buddy Nick Wilday showed me this whole Grateful Dead subculture on Instagram, and everybody making lot tees, and that was something that I really didn't know anything about at all. And counts like Dean's Nuts and that stuff really gained popularity, and it seemed like got the ball rolling for a lot of other people. But I'd reached out to Alex, I guess, in the summer. He'd gone on tour with Dead and Company and was coming off, and I thought that I was going to be in the area at the same time, and that didn't end up working out.
But you're here now.
Yeah, here now, yeah. So,
and it's basically summer. It's fucking 70 degrees and sunny here in Denver today. So
no doubt. It's very nice.
Might as well be summer.
Yeah. So, we'll kind of start out from the beginning. You grew up in Illinois?
I did, yeah. Chicago suburbs. Pretty cookie cutter, middle class, whatever, neighborhood, and a really great place to grow up, honestly.
Yeah.
Lots of lakes and stuff where I grew up, and a lot of great sports programs and a lot of good, family stuff going on there.
For sure.
So, I grew up out in the suburbs, and, I went to school in Illinois, went to U of I. Got a degree there. Worked in the city for a year. Worked out in the suburbs for a couple of years, and then eventually, when I was 25, came out here to Colorado.
Yeah. What did you study?
It was like a pre-law kind of track, political science, communication, whatever. I always had the intent of going to law school
Yeah.
after undergrad, and that just didn't happen for a number of reasons. Kind of just talked myself out of it ultimately, and worked at a law firm for a year to kind of get a taste for it. And yeah, happy to have not done it, but
Yeah.
sometimes still think about it, I guess. I don't know.
For sure.
Grad school's never off the radar, I suppose.
Yeah. You can go back anytime.
For sure.
So what led you to Colorado?
Well, like a lot of people in the Midwest, I had spent like most of my childhood vacationing out here.
Yeah.
A couple of the big trips of my early childhood were just me and my parents taking road trips like all through the American West. And my dad's little brother, rest in peace, lived out here, so this is always like a big stop when we came out west. If we're going to Utah or Wyoming or something, always drove to Denver first to visit family. And my older brother's best friend lives here, and I don't know, it's just kind of like always on the radar.
Yeah.
Took a couple trips out here during college with friends, and kind of convinced myself, I was like, all right, if I ever leave Chicago, like I'm coming to Colorado. It's just always like on the back burner. And then
I'm sure coming in college is like it's a different perspective than when you're coming here as a kid.
Sure, yeah. We did like we did like one of those organized college trips. I was in a fraternity and stuff, so we did one of those organized college trips where they did like a big like snowboard spring break, whatever.
For sure.
And
did that. For sure.
Did that whole thing, and that was a lot of fun. And came out here on my own volition a few times too. And then it was just always in the back of my mind. And I don't know. Winters in Chicago are super depressing. It just like the month of February, which we have just entered now, usually in Chicago it's just like overcast and like 20 degrees or less for like that entire month. And the days are so short and stuff. And like, oh my God, it was like so depressing. And so we were trying to like make the most of it. And I was living with friends in a lake house. We were playing ice hockey and learning about ice fishing and shit like that. But it was like I just wanted to be able to do more year round. It's just like for me, I've had a few like mental health struggles growing up and stuff, and being outside was always like my number one medication. Like
Definitely.
I just have to do stuff outside all the time. It's what keeps my head above water. So this is an easy place to do it.
For sure. I same boat actually. I was in fraternity and came up here snowboarding, go to Breckenridge, and I'd been up here once in the summer, and obviously loved it then, but I was a little bit younger and came in college and got up in the mountains for the first time, and I've been hooked ever since.
Yeah, it's easy to fall in love with. And it's funny too, because I mean, like days like today, for example, I said it's 70 and sunny. It's like people have this weird misconception that Denver itself is like in the mountains, or it's like super cold and snowy and stuff, but really it's not. It's more like a desert here
the high
compared
desert.
to the south or the Midwest, right? So it's
sure.
like in the winter it's not uncommon for it to be warm and sunny all the time. And if you want to go play in the snow, you can. You just drive an hour and a half that way.
Mm-hmm.
But otherwise, we just have great weather here. And it's like, I don't know, if there was like a large body of water in or around Denver, it would be like literally the most perfect place on earth. It's like I know me personally, because like I said, where I grew up, there was lakes, there was rivers, lots of boating culture and this kind of stuff. And I know, and I've talked about it with other people, it's like when you move here, you kind of like dry out after a while, and you start to crave it.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I've actually known multiple people that came from the Midwest or the East Coast or something, and like lived in Colorado for a few years, and then all of a sudden you hear they just like moved to Florida, or got like a job. Like this kid John that grew up literally around the corner from me growing up, he came out here and he was did the lifty thing for a little while and worked up the hierarchy at Keystone, and then like all of a sudden one day just dropped everything that he had established in Colorado and literally just like I said, moved to Florida, became a skipper. Like
wow.
Just like did like the whole like training regiment to be not like a commercial fisherman, but he does like yacht crew type thing. So when people charter yachts and they need to hire a captain and a first mate and like whatever else is part of that hierarchy, you just kind of like got into that. It's kind of a funny trajectory. It's like
for sure.
Like I said,
from one extreme to another.
Yeah, people just come out here and like they love it, and then they just dry out, and it's like your bones get dry, and it's like I need a body of water.
Yeah, I lived here like 3 years ago in Denver, and kind of near Sloan's Lake, and I remember going and riding my bike around there and seeing people with their boats out there, and we're just like, what are y'all doing? Like,
just like spinning in a circle. It's a tiny ass lake.
It's like, it's one thing if there's people out there rowing or something like that, but it's like you guys are wanting a wakeboard right in the middle of this windy
Yeah,
lake?
there's a few spots to do it. I know there's Green Mountain Reservoir up north of Silverthorne. My buddy Blair lives up in Silverthorne. He's been out there, and it's funny because like if you drive by that lake right now, like I just did last week on a steamboat, it's like there's hardly any water in it.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
very
yeah.
seasonal.
Yeah.
It's like they open their floodgates, whatever, at the end of the season, and water comes downhill, and then it's like empty for winter. But then all the snow melt, obviously. There's feet and feet of snow up there, so the snow melts and refills it. So it happens out here. It's just hard to find.
Yeah, yeah, no doubt. So, when did you pick up the Grateful Dead?
It's a great question. So I grew up in a family where I had much older siblings. I have 3 brothers and a sister, and I was kind of like an oops baby.
Gotcha.
That my parents had when they were 40. So when I was a little kid, my brothers were all teenagers.
Yeah.
And they were into it, probably not to the extent that we are, a lot of the people that are listening to this would be, but they were into it because it was still the early 90s then, and it was still actually happening, right?
Right.
And so they were going to shows and stuff, late 80s, early 90s. My one brother was at, the final shows at Soldier in 95. So I grew up around it.
Yeah.
Like I said, my siblings were into it. My parents, not so much. My parents are pretty straight, and, they grew up they were baby boomers and grew up in the peak of a lot of that hippie stuff that was happening.
Yeah.
But they had grown up in a situation where, and this is just kind of like family history, but there was alcoholism, and there was domestic abuse issues, and there was like violence. It was a lot of mob influenced lifestyle still, because I grew up Italian, living in downtown Chicago. And my parents decided to get as far away from that, physically and emotionally and literally as they could. And that's how they ended up moving out to the suburbs. And so they never smoked pot or anything. And they still loved music. And my first concert, funny enough, was like when I was still in my mom's uterus. We went to the Rolling Stones at Alpine Valley, 89.
Wow.
Yeah. She didn't go to the Dead shows that year. I think my brother Joe and his best friend Mark did. Yeah, I was at Rolling Stones 89 in utero. It's kind of funny. So I grew up with my brothers around, hearing it. My brother Drew was a big Jerry fan, loved all of his like solo work and stuff, and then like kind of my own kind of genesis of it. And actually, when I made that long distance runner sweater, and I kind of wrote a backstory to it for the first time. I just like, for whatever reason, just like decided to include some backstories. PBS had Channel 11 growing up, right? And they would, like, late at night, on the weekends when everything else was off air, sometimes they would air like vintage concerts and stuff. And like, one time I remember, I think it was probably like right at the end of middle school, or maybe like between middle school and high school, they played the closing of Winterland on Channel 11. And I had at that time, just becoming a teenager and trying to make my own space in my home, and I had this like little hangout den in my basement where I had a computer that had like the big ass tower and the CRT screen, right? Because this is
dial-up.
This is what, 2004-ish.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I had that, and I had an old ass like Zenith TV that had like the pull on like lever and stuff. It was all like the reject stuff that had like, been replaced upstairs in the living room in my dad's office, kind of like making its way to the basement. But I made like my own little hangout. My mom bought me a little IKEA futon, and I had like a tapestry and whatever other corny stuff going on down there. And like, so yeah, that came on. And I just remember it was funny because I was I was obviously very aware of the Dead and stuff, and at that point in time, I was getting really into long distance running. I'd done cross country in middle school. My friend Phil was a phenomenal runner and kind of like dragged me into it. I ended up carrying that through high school as well, like doing the running thing.
Yeah.
So I watched that concert, and I remember like 3 or 4 tracks into it, they do Scarlet Fire, and I remember like just getting like sucked into it. It kind of started like in the background, and I was on AOL Instant Messenger chatting with the homies or whatever, and the show was on in the background, and I remember like just like getting like finding myself like looking more and more at it and not what I was doing on the computer. And eventually, like by the time Scarlet Fire came on, like I was just totally sucked into it and totally entrenched in what was happening on the television. And I just remember like all the lights were off in the basement, and it's just my computer and maybe like one light in the background, and just like the purple glow of that concert like just really got me. Like it was like literally like a moth to a flame kind of thing, or just like like it just really sucked me in. And listening to that, and like it was the first time that I felt a Dead song like really speak to me, because I was obsessed with running at this point. And like the whole line, like long distance runner, what you standing there for, like it just kind of like hit me like out of nowhere. I was like, whoa, that felt kind of like pointed. and I just ended up totally falling in love with that show. Like a Christmas or two later, I got the DVD of it, and yeah, that was kind of like the first big foray into like live Dead music for me, and it just really became transformative. And it's actually kind of funny because fell in love with it and kind of like moved away from it for a short while in high school, because that's when, at that time, when like hardcore like emo music was all the rage,
No
right?
doubt. Yeah.
And a lot of my friends were into that, and we had friends that were in bands and stuff. So it was funny because a couple of my best friends continued down that path of getting really into the Dead and really into Fish, and they were listening to String Cheese and Widespread and like really doing the jam band thing. And I was kind of like deviating from that for a while because my best friend in cross country and stuff. Then we got like into like the hardcore music, and like that we were going to all those shows, and it was just like at the roller rink and shit. Right?
What else were you supposed to do as a cross country kid other than be emo?
Right. It just really fit the whole bill. So it's kind of funny. And then like towards the end of high school and stuff, my best friend Brad, who I met, he was my lab partner in like honors bio, and he had joined the tennis team as well. So I ended up hanging out with this kid a lot. And he's the one in the photo right here. This is from Fare Thee Well, from the 50th anniversary shows. Yeah. And once Brad kind of tied into my best friend group with David and the two Johns, that's when like a lot of it kind of all came together. And that's when we actually started to go see real shows with the surviving members of the band and stuff. And kind of just, from there it just became an outright obsession. And
I guess when did you start going to see the remaining members of the band?
First show was Phil Lush and Friends at Summerfest, which was like the big like outdoor music fest in Milwaukee. Okay. It's not like a camping festival, and it's not strictly any one genre too. I mean, they pull in like a lot of like leading country and pop acts and stuff, but Phil headlined one evening. It was actually on the 4th of July, and that becomes a recurring theme in my Deadhead fandom. Yeah. The 4th of July does. But me and David, my best friend that's very, very musically intelligent, very astute, and he was probably the first one to like really do the deep dive into it and whatever, and he kind of had the idea to go up and see Phil. So we had freshly graduated high school in '08, so freshly graduated. It was that summer, figuring out our college plans and whatever, and we went up and saw Phil. And man, that was a phenomenal show. I remember this. So he was touring with Jackie Green at the time, and Jackie is a very, very high energy live musician. Gotcha. And especially, I feel like I don't really have a lot of context, but I would assume that he was in a really good stride at that point, because I just remember his whole stage presence, both playing at and not playing. The non-verbal, non-musical stuff was really, really enchanting. It was a great show. It was Shakedown opener. It was really cool. It's like you really just walked into that scene, and like I said, so the context of Summerfest, it's like a lot of pop acts, a lot of country. This is southern Wisconsin, right? So there's a lot of you get like Miranda Lambert, you'll get fucking whatever country stars in their heyday that year is headlining, right? And Taylor Swift is headlining there, and it's like the very, very broad and diverse musical lineup in a good way, so a lot of people can enjoy it. But it's like I remember walking through the festival grounds and everything, and there's just so much going on. And, Harley Davidson's a huge thing in Wisconsin, especially Milwaukee. So it's like they're sponsoring everything, and like a lot of tractor companies and stuff. So you get like a lot of yeehaw energy going on. And then like walking into the stage area where Phil was playing was just like a whole atmosphere very much of its own. And it's like you just instantly like turned on to like what was happening in that area. And it's like, it's kind of like everyone knows each other kind of thing, even though you don't. And just like a very like universal sense of knowing in that crowd, like what's coming, like what we're getting into. Obviously a shit ton of people there probably on psychedelics, acid or something, and everyone's smoking pot. And it's like everyone's kind of falling into this known comfort zone of a Dead show. And it was very interesting, because that was our first, besides seeing like little cover bands, around the hometown or whatever, that was like our first like real foray into it. And it was just like the first time you kind of like walk into that, and like whether you have any context of what the Dead is or not, like it's just very apparent that it's a very inclusive culture in a sense that like everyone knows what's going on and like what's happening. And it's just mind blowing.
Well, I can only imagine, like you said, with the variety of acts there, like the people that came to see Phil came to see Phil. For sure.
And, I mean, you don't just like randomly stumble upon that show. I mean, I'm sure a few people did, and I hope they loved it. But yeah, I mean, the people that were there were very specifically there for Phil.
Yeah.
And he was on the second biggest stage, I think, and it was just like, it was like overpacked. Like, I mean, they had people like in the overflow, and it's like he could have easily taken like the big main stage that Taylor or whoever was playing that night. And yeah, it was just massive. Briggs and Stratton sponsored that stage, and I remember that so vividly because I was tripping my nuts off and just staring at that sign for some period of time, for sure. Like I said, it's a lot of like culture mashup happening there.
For sure. That's funny. Had you pursued any other jam bands at that point, or?
We saw, so Fish came back the next summer, and that was the big deal. That was 2009. We had seen Umphreys a bunch of times because Umphreys kind of originated out of Chicagoland.
Okay.
I'm trying to remember who it was. One of the teachers at my high school was like cousin to Chris Myers or something like that. So it's like we had kind of like discovered that link to it. So we'd seen Umphreys a bunch of times. They were still like kind of a smaller, more regional touring act at that point. I think they were just kind of getting their nationwide momentum.
Right.
We had seen Mo, and we had seen String Cheese, because that was when Summer Camp was like the big festival, still is, in Illinois. And those three bands at that point in time were kind of like the revolving headliners. It was Mo, it was Umphreys, and it was String Cheese. We were kind of like, taking turns being the big act at Summer Camp. So that was, in Illinois, and in that period of time, that's who we were seeing live. And there's a couple other really good, like I said, like regional acts, like Family Groove Company was one. I think Dopapod kind of, I don't know if they were from Illinois, but I know that they, like at our college venues and stuff, they were like another band that was coming through a lot.
Yeah.
So it was kind of just that kind of stuff. Like I said, going to Phil was like the first time that we'd seen something of that like magnitude.
Yeah. For sure.
How about you? What was your first foray?
So, well, my first concert, he's talked about your first concert of being the Rolling Stones. My first concert that I recall, I don't think my parents, like, they enjoy music, and my dad really enjoys music.
Yeah.
And so he'll find a show to go drag my mom to or whatever every once in a while, but it's usually like Creedence or something like that,
Yeah.
But the very first concert that I recall was George Strait.
Oh, sweet.
And the CenturyLink Center in Shreveport, Louisiana.
Yeah, that's a good one too, because George Strait, he's like one of those guys that's kind of like the link between like old school outlaw country and then like modern pop country. He's kind of both.
For sure.
So it's not like, it wasn't one or the other. So it's probably a pretty cool show.
What, 50 number one hits or something?
Yeah, he's been doing it forever.
But my second show ever was a local show from a hardcore band called 12 Gauge Valentine.
There you go. that is the most, the most perfect name for that you could probably imagine.
Oddly enough, so there's a guy in Monroe where I grew up, and he has a wood shop, and I got him on the podcast. It's Washita Antique Woods is what his business is called, what's the podcast called. But I had known that he was a musician and that he had been a musician in that time period and was in the hardcore scene, and I brought up that exact statement, the George Strait 12 Gauge Valentine. He was like, "Oh, you must have done your research," and I was like, "You were in that band?" He was like, "Yeah."
What?
I was in that band. He was like, "I was in the band like towards the end of them." But
interesting.
Yeah, I was like, "Dude, that's nuts!" Like,
yeah, that's some full circle shit right there.
Yeah, for sure.
Very
But
fun.
yeah, I have never seen any members of the Grateful Dead.
Not yet. You didn't go to any shows this summer?
No, not yet. I haven't had anything planned yet. But I saw Panic was the first like jam band that I really went and saw. My buddy Will Day was like, "Hey man, let's go see Widespread Panic in Rogers, Arkansas, just outside of Fayetteville," which was like a 6-hour drive from our house. And I was like, "Are you talking about that band on Old Row?" That was like literally what I said to him. just so ashamed of now.
All the old row kids are all heads now. It's fucking great.
Yeah. So we went, and he was like, "Look, if nothing else, we'll go make fun of some wooks and come home." And I was always like a big Southern rock guy to begin with, Skynyrd and
sure.
Allman Brothers and that kind of deal. And
on brand.
Yeah, and so the Panic was like very much right up my alley. And it kind of took the whole show for me to get convinced of it, but like the next year we went to New Year's Eve in Nashville, and at the Bridgestone, which was a wild show.
I believe it.
To the point that
what New Year's Eve? What year was that?
It may have been. It was 4 years ago, maybe.
Yeah,
2015.
we were talking about my friend Brett. He's a huge spread fan, and he had mentioned some New Year's show that was like a all timer.
Yeah.
Something, and it was about that time.
It was the last time that they did a big venue. Since then, they've just done the Fox in Atlanta, which is a much smaller place. But yeah, like
I don't know if it was 2011 or something like that. But I just remember Brett saying it was like an all timer show.
But that year, yeah, we did New Year's Eve there, and the next day, the Predators hockey team had to play in the Bridgestone Arena, and they did not have enough time to clean up the whole arena.
Jesus.
Like Predators fans were talking about how trash the arena was from the concert the night before and stuff.
I always wonder about that, and it cracks me up, and especially after doing all the shows I did this summer, and then it's like football season, and you're watching, and it's like it's just so funny to me to know some of the chaos that I've observed, like in that stadium, and some of the stuff that's gone down, and then to see it on television and it's all cleaned up. And I mean, there's trash and crazy people at football games too. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But it's just like such a different style of behavior, I guess, that's happening at those two things. And to see that weird juxtaposition, and to see Tom Brady's smiling face, like, standing in the middle of the field, it's like, wow, I stood in that exact same spot, and I didn't look anything like that. It's like, God, I'm terrified to know what I looked like in the middle of the show. Who knows? Funny. Yeah, and like again on New Year's, we were in there, and it's like, man, on New Year's, like the Chase Center was just like one big cloud of pot smoke.
Yeah,
and it's like,
yeah.
And then literally 2 or 3 days later, like my sister sends me a picture, and she is sitting like row 6 at the Golden State Warriors game, and I'm like, does it still smell like weed in there? Like I can't imagine like what the turnaround time is. And I mean, God bless the people that do that job, because that sucks.
For sure.
That clean those stadiums, and they normally presumably do a wonderful job, because they go from just the chaos of 2 nights of Grateful Dead or Dead Company music, right? And then I try to remember, it's like just 2 or 3 days later, and it's all like lit up inside, and the lights are really bright, and it's just like, holy cow, the turnaround on that's pretty impressive.
So I guess what is your opinion? Obviously you followed the Dead Company around, so I assume that you still enjoy John Mayer and whatnot, but I know that was like a controversial topic to some. What's your opinion on that, I guess?
I mean, I love Mayer as a musician. His solo music is not something that I've really gotten into, to be honest. And this is actually, there's a bigger like full circle story behind this, and it's really funny. Another good friend of mine, Ryan, who is a big music nut, and he hasn't ever really gotten into the Dead so much, but he's a guitar player, very, very good guitar player. So is his father. It was funny because I remember he hated Fish in high school, and he was another kid that was on the cross country team and stuff. So he was in the bigger, friend circle that I had with all these different music loves. And it was funny because he used to rip on Fish so hard, and then like all of a sudden one day that changed, and he became like obsessed with Trey as a guitar player. And it's like, how could you not be a guitar player and not love Trey?
Right.
So him and I rode up in his old school Honda Accord to Alpine Valley for those Fish shows in 2009. But where Merritt ties into this is Ryan was the one that collected like all the Chappelle Show DVDs as they came out. So they wrap up the season, they release a DVD or whatever, and Ryan owned all these DVDs. And there's the one episode, it's like some barbershop skit, whatever's going on, and Mayer's in it with Chappelle, right? And they're just like, they're narrating, and Chappelle's like soul singing, and John's playing guitar or whatever. I remember like Ryan and I talking to each other and like ripping on, it's like when Mayer is still kind of young in his career, right? So it's like Room for Squares was the big album with all the corny love songs on it. And we're like talking, and it's like, dude, this guy's such a good guitarist and musician. And we were wondering out loud to ourselves, like, when will he become relevant to like our actual music taste? I felt like it was going to happen at some point, and I was like, listening to just play solo blues is just incredible. And it's like there's got to be at some point in his career trajectory where he's going to actually become relevant to music that we like or that we'll just listen to, right? So that was like something that happened around the same time that I was getting into the Dead. This is 8th grade, freshman year of high school, whatever. And we had that thought, that conversation, And then, like I said, it becomes very full circle because we had that thought. We got into the Dead. Ryan, not so much, but I did. And then, yeah, and then it's like, what, 15 years later, all of a sudden it's like, the Dead are done. I guess, yeah, more like 10 years later. But like, we had this, went to Fare Thee Well and had this idea in our head that that's the last time that we'll see those guys together playing large shows. They might do their own solo thing here and there, but this is pretty much it, right? And yeah, and just a few months after that. So I mean, Fare Thee Well happened. That was in Chicago, right? I moved to Colorado a mere few weeks after that, and then a few weeks later, got the news that no, something's happening.
Yeah.
John Mayer has introduced himself more or less to Bob and Billy, and something's stirring there. And I think John had jammed with Phil once in that prior year. He had jammed with J-Rad once, and it's like this energy was moving towards it, and then they made the announcement that this new thing, Dead and Company, was happening.
Yeah, I do remember whenever he got on with J-Rad and seeing that, and was like, oh man, like this could do something. This could go somewhere.
Yeah, there's an Althea on YouTube from the first time. I think it was the first time John had jammed at J-Rad that it's nutty.
Yeah.
It just goes on for like 15 minutes. It's just so hardcore. It's amazing.
Yeah. I guess who was playing guitar for Fare Thee Well? I don't know that.
Trey.
Okay.
Trey Anastasio did.
Okay.
And it was good. It was, I don't know. It was as good as it probably could have been for bringing Trey in. Trey knows a lot of these songs. They played with Phil a couple of shows in '99, and if you really dig back on Phish history, they kind of started. Scarlet Fire was like in their rotation when they were like literally a brand new band playing college house parties.
Gotcha.
So he was definitely in on the context of the music.
Right.
And like I said, for getting this group of guys, most of them geriatric at this point, right? I mean, they're on the verge of turning 70.
Yeah.
To get them together and play, like it was as good as it possibly could have been just for playing with the 5 shows that they played. I think they played 2 in California and 3 in Chicago, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like they had a whole tour to like warm up and get to speed.
Right.
Like we've seen Dead and Company, come and go with like really hitting a stride a few
I was about
times.
to say, I was about to say that, like, you definitely see that how like they start off kind of slow and
and I think that's probably true for any band, whether you're young or old and you're playing jam music or hardcore music, you just hit a stride or you don't.
Right.
So Trey was phenomenal at those shows, and it was, I think, the music was coherent, and there was some really good jamming and stuff, and I think there's kind of you could really see there's a whole book about this now called Fare Thee Well, I think, and it's like you could kind of see, if you knew who the musicians really were, you could really see the power struggle happening on stage.
Yeah.
And Phil, I think, really, when you talk to people who have really gotten a deep dive into the music, they talk about Phil kind of being the conductor.
Okay.
And you think of Jerry as like the leader of the band and stuff, and was leading the jams, but if you really go down another layer and you start to listen to the jams of the Grateful Dead in their heyday, 70s and 80s and stuff, it's like you really notice that the bass is like the driving factor in kind of like leading through jams, transitioning back to the chorus or back to into a verse or something. Like the moments of clarity and the kind of like changing what they're doing, Phil's really leading that.
Gotcha.
So I think Phil kind of thought of himself as the conductor of Fare Thee Well, and there's a few points where I think he kind of, for better or for worse, overpowered the jam just like on sheer authority. And if you watch the YouTube videos, you can literally see it happening in a few points. And then and I think Bobby was always like the little brother of the band, and in his own sense. So like, I think he was coming to a time where he really wanted to be front and center, be the lead guy, whatever, and kind of call the shots. And I think you could kind of see the power struggle that was happening there. So when Bobby kind of broke out that he was going on tour again, Dead and Company, this and that, it wasn't any surprise to me that it wasn't with Phil. Because I think Bobby really, for the first time, and what's ultimately going to be the last time for him as a huge touring act, wanted to be, the front man, wanted to be the leader of the band. So that was kind of my gist of Fare Thee Well, and it was good. We had an absolute blast. Saturday, 4th of July again. Like I said, this is a revolving theme. We all got down to the pit. The ticketing for that was just insanity. It was like months of checking on Ticketmaster and Craigslist and looking for stuff, and I got a lot of like false leads, and ended up getting down in the pit, me, my friend Brad, and this gentleman Dave that I was working with at the time. He was the lab manager at this medical company I was working at.
Yeah.
And that was a very special day to do 4th of July, with the iteration of the Grateful Dead again. This time I was with Brad. We were with Dave. We were in the pit. We were really not close, but not far, probably about halfway between the soundboard and the stage. And it was actually the perfect spot because Trey, when he shreds, just kind of like gets lost in this like gaze once in a while where he just kind of like, he's not like looking at anything in particular. Right. His eyes are just like out there. But it was kind of funny because we felt like he was looking right at us.
Yeah.
Like that gaze was coming right in our direction.
Yeah, it was just far off.
So it's kind of cool. It's just like you could just really get lost in music and just like watch Trey just peering out into the crowd. You just kind of like get fixated like right on where we were. It was a wonderful show. A lot of fun, and it was like just a lot of like funny idiosyncrasies, and kind of like jokes that had become like long running jokes after like going to shows for a while. And we had seen Rat Dog down in Chicago. We had seen Further once, and so it's kind of like, I don't know, it's just kind of like adding like a lot of context. So it's just like kind of tied everything together. I stayed at the Congress Hotel, which kind of became an epicenter of the after parties, and people ripping gas out on the street and stuff, and that's not so pretty. But they had fan art galleries in the lobby, and
wow.
I mean the whole entire hotel was heads and wooks at that point. It's just like there was no one else there. If there was, I felt so bad for them because it was like that was our party. And everyone's invited, but if you didn't want to be there, like, sorry, man, like you were in it regardless, kind of deal.
Yeah. Talking about the gas, man, like I had never seen it to the point that I did earlier, or I guess last year, 2019.
Yeah.
Widespread Panic, Jackson, Mississippi.
Mm-hmm.
We walk out of there, and the Nitrous Mafia was in full effect.
Yeah.
They were everywhere, and I had some friends with me who that was their first Panic show.
Sure.
And they were just like really, really thrown off by it all.
Yeah,
it was really funny.
It's really jarring if you're not expecting it. You don't know that it's kind of, again, for better or for worse, part of the scene. It is kind of like that's probably like the one thing. And I remember my friend Brett mentioning this too. He's like, because I had lulled over the idea at the Shoreline shows this summer of bringing my teenage nephew, and I asked him if he wanted to go, and he did. And he plays guitar, and he knows who Mayer is, and he's growing up in the Bay Area, so there's a lot of people that my sister and her husband hang out with that used to see shows when they were teenagers and stuff, right? Because they're in the Bay Area. So, and he wanted to go, and then Brett asked me at one point, he's like, how would you explain like Nitrous to Ben? It's like, I mean, just like, what is like, how do you like really just explain that to a young person who's going to their first big concert? And it's like, and then all of a sudden you hear just off in the distance, and like zombies start walking by, and it's like, oh my gosh. And I don't hate the drug, and I don't hate people having a good time, but like it very hard to argue, I should say, that it's a good look for the scene.
Yeah.
It's like there's all the litter involved, and the guys that are doing it are kind of thuggish. They're not there for the music, they're there to make cash as much as they can in a short period of time, right?
For sure.
So it's not a great look, and I'm not gonna like rag on it because it's once in a while I get sucked into it and I do it. It's kind of part of the experience sometimes.
Yeah.
But it's like, just I wish it wasn't in such like a. It just seems kind of dark. It's like the one way I'll put it. And I remember, like, if you read about kind of the pivot of the scene of the actual Grateful Dead scene over the years, it's like, it's the 70s were their own time, and like the 80s happened, and it started picking up a lot of steam, and then like everyone talks about the touch heads. It's like they finally had like a big smash radio hit.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden you had a huge influx of people to the concerts, to the live shows that hadn't been there before, didn't really have a lot of familiarity with what's going on there, and they're just there to party.
Yeah.
You got college frat kids, and you got people that wouldn't typically have gotten into the Dead, but they heard this radio hit, and they're like, this is a really fun song. Like, it's kind of a depressing lyrics and a really fun song at the same time. It's really interesting. Like, like Touch of Grey is, and it's like. So you go and see the show, and it's like the scene took a turn there, and then you go into the 90s, and the scene kind of got even more dark, and it's like that's when gate crashing was becoming a thing, and deaths or missing people were happening because you had huge swaths of people that were coming to the shows without tickets, and they were just there to party in the parking lot.
Gotcha.
And they, whether they were familiar with the music or not, or whatever, is besides the point. But it was kind of like taking like a dark turn, and I think Nitrous is kind of like the thing that's like almost reminiscent of that now still. It's like sometimes when I see it, I'm like, that's people that are getting like fucked up beyond any comprehension of what they're doing to themselves at that point.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's going to like permanently destroy them or anything, but it's like, even just for that night, it's like you see someone that's like mostly kind of conscious, and it's like, and they're still functioning, but like lights on, nobody's home. And I don't know. It's like, go back to your hotel and just like do whippets, get a cracker or something. I hate it, especially when you just see people like sitting on a curb, and it's like, now it's the middle of the night and like the fun's over, and it's like you see it, and it's just kind of like, it takes like a very quick and very sharp pivot from being really fun and cool to being kind of sad.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, I don't know, it's kind of like being like, like at our age, you're coming up on 30 or you're turning 30, and it's like people that are still like living like a very party lifestyle and stuff. It's like you just kind of like see there's a certain point in time where things that are like really cool and like really fun, like all of a sudden it just becomes sad. Yeah. And it's like, it's just not cool anymore.
Not so cool and fun anymore.
Yeah. And like, so it's like that's like in the big picture in life. And then like in the context of like one concert, one show, one day, one evening, it's like, you can kind of like see that happening on a microcosmic level. It's like, man, this shit is so much fun until like a very delicate point where all of a sudden it's just kind of sad.
Yeah. I can only relate that to like, because I went to college in the town that I basically grew up in, and then continued to live there, is like going to the fraternity house and hanging out with frat guys. It's like,
for sure,
like because I ended up dropping a little early, like before I graduated, and but was still like on good terms with everybody. And it was like maybe 2 years later, it was like, it wasn't like a regular thing or anything, but it was like I went up there and was like, man, you're really out of place, bro. You just need to go to a bar.
Yeah, you need to figure your shit out.
Yeah,
and quickly.
Yeah,
if possible, please.
Yep.
Yeah.
But I guess, when did you start getting into graphic design and t-shirt making and that kind of deal?
That's something that was always like a very attractive part of the scene and culture to me, and I always thought that was so cool that, when we went to these shows when we were younger, and it's like we weren't really participating at any level at that point, but I thought it was so cool that this whole little like micro economy would pop up around a show.
Yeah. And
you could tell it was very much its own thing. It had its own, its own kind of etiquette, its own sense of humor, its own, culture, really, right? And I always thought it was kind of cool that it just followed the band, whichever band it was. It followed the music, and it popped up in every city, and it was kind of the same. And it was a lot of the same vendors and a lot of the same energy and stuff that would just pop up. And it was almost like, it's a Dylan cover. I don't know if it's Desolation Row or something, but like there's like the line, like the circus was in town,
right?
And when the Dead play that, the crowd goes nuts, whatever. And it's that I had that thought even before I maybe even heard that song. It's like, it's kind of like a traveling circus.
Yeah.
It's like there's the big main act, and that's the band, that's the concert for the night. But there's all these like side shows, and there's this like I said, this micro economy that pops up. And it has its own cuisine, its own fashion styles. It has its own, inside jokes and stuff. And I always thought that was so cool. And I remember, I think it was when we saw, I think it was Rat Dog and Allman Brothers at Northerly Island in Chicago. And that venue is really cool. It's on Meigs Airfield, which was like a World War II era like Air Force base, right, in Chicago. And it's right up on Lake Michigan there. And they built this music venue. And what's funny is that they built the venue so that the music kind of like goes out towards Lake Michigan, goes out towards the water.
Gotcha.
And behind the venue, there's this little bay, and it's right at the end of the runway. And there's like this jetty that goes out, and there's all these like huge concrete and asphalt slabs from when they broke up some of the old runways, right? Mm-hmm. And it makes this big, breakwater, and there's like these like big like, it's kind of like not like a pier or anything, but just like this concrete thing, like where the runways would have ended, that goes out into the water. And it's these big giant steps. And so people hang out there all the time, beautiful place to just like catch a sunset or just hang out by the water. But what's funny is that you could hear the venue, Northerly Island, really well from this spot.
Yeah.
And what would happen is over the years, people started to figure this out. So there'd be this huge like party outside the venue where you could hear the music pretty damn well, especially if it wasn't windy, right? And you didn't have to pay anything to get in. You could just hang out there. So we would go there and catch shows. And we watched Humphreys there. We watched this Rat Dog and Allman Brothers show from there. And you could even see like some of the light show and stuff. So it was like, I don't know, it's kind of like, if you ever watch a baseball game at Wrigley Field, they sell like rooftop spots like across the street. It's the same thing. You're basically just like at a different spot watching the same show.
Yeah.
So I remember like turning to my friend David, who was at the show there, and like for the first time really vocalizing that like this is like really cool as a cultural phenomenon, and it's like would love to participate in it. And we were talking about, you know, like should we do like try to do a full tour, you know, sometime like while we're still in college, still young adults or whatever. And we're kind of like arguing over like, is it better, like if you're gonna do that, like what's the cooler way to do it? Like do you just like set out with like no plan and just fly by the seat of your pants and see what happens?
Yeah.
Or do you kind of like plan for it for a couple weeks or months and you kind of like figure out, you know, set your vehicle up so you can sleep in it if you need to, or you can cook out the back if you need to, you know, have all your camping gear. Like, are you going to sell something on the lot? Like, you know, what is it?
Right.
Like, are you going to do that whole thing, or are you just going to like fucking wing it and just see what happens? And people do both, right? There's merits to both. And I've seen people have great success and great failure doing both. What's up, guy?
Cruz, welcome back.
Yeah. Here's Cruz. This is Cruz. He's the resident mascot of my apartment here. So I remember having that conversation, and like that's when it became like a desire of mine to like want to do that.
Yeah.
And the graphic design thing came about in high school. We had to take some sort of like art elective like junior year or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I took a graphic design was the class that I chose for my art class, and actually had a really great group of people that were in the class. And I remember the teacher taking a liking to me and to the people in the class who were pretty good at what they were doing. And I think I'm really good at graphic design in the context of like I'm not like a great like freehand artist, and like I've never like learned to paint or anything. Like I can sketch things out, you know, as needed and whatever, but I've never been like a phenomenal drawer or anything. Right. I think for me it's kind of the art that I create and the things that I like to make are just like having good kind of like spatial awareness, you know, in art and stuff, and be able to do like combine, you know, words and images and you just create something that's you know, easy to look at or enjoyable to look at or whatever, you know. So it's like I don't consider myself like an artist so much as I think like real artists can just draw or paint or do something amazing. I'm more of like an assembler. You know, it's like I can take things and assemble them in a way that's just very aesthetically pleasing. And I think the teacher recognized that too. But I mean, there's a huge market in graphic design for that, where you're combining text and images and you know, stuff like that. And then I was in that class with Ryan Tippery, who's a phenomenal artist of many mediums. And, you know, him and I sat next to each other and fed off a lot of energy together. And Tippery and I have always really just like liked the way that each other kind of thinks about things and like the things that the other person gets excited about. And I still keep up with him. You know, we were never like super tight friends, but he was always someone that like when I needed like some sort of like artistic shoulder to like lean on or like throw an idea off of, like Ryan was always there to like hear me out. And we still chat to this day. And you know, he's with you know, a big firm in Chicago now, and he's still a great artist. I need to get something of his for my apartment here. And then Jessica Ludwig was a chick I was close with in the church scene, and she's like a really good drawer, and she took to Adobe Illustrator like nobody else. So we had this little clique in our graphic design class, and that's kind of where it started for me. And t-shirts, you know, started off, and this is probably pretty familiar, just like fraternity events. You know, it's like we were doing Fall Rush, or we were doing our football tailgate, or we were doing, you know, some sort of event that warranted a t-shirt. And I had a couple designs, you know, that got selected out of, there's a couple other guys that did it in our specific fraternity. There's other guys that kind of from other houses or unaffiliated people that would go around and do that kind of thing that were really good.
Gotcha.
But I think, my shirts always kind of stood out. It's just really, really clean. You know, I got a lot of compliments on them, and that's when I decided, you know, it's like, you know, maybe I can make something out of this someday. And the idea kind of got shelved for a while, and then I had a t-shirt designed for Fare Thee Well that I wanted to make, but it was a grotesque copyright violation. And I brought it to a printer, and eventually like they did the initial quoting and stuff. And then eventually a guy called, he goes, "Hey, you know, we've had to like, you know, shut people down for less than this before. And it's just like, we don't want to like put our brand on doing something that's such a copyright violation." He's like, "If you want to change it up and take the words, you know, celebrating Grateful Dead out of it and take the steal your face off of it," he was like, "You know, I'm happy to work with you on something." And I just kind of like abandoned the idea altogether. And I was like, whatever, I just need to figure out, you know, getting to the shows and, you know, making that all happen.
Right.
So the first thing I ever made and sold on lot was 2016 when the Dead were coming to Boulder. That was the first time. So Dead and Company started fall of 15. They played indoors in Broomfield here in Colorado, and then they played outside at Folsom Field for the first time in 2016. And that's when, you know, we were in peak election season then, right? And
for sure.
This is the rise of Donald Trump as a actual contender for president of the United States of America, and he had the slogan, "Make America Great Again."
Yeah.
And so I was following that all very closely. I've always been really involved in politics, just as an interest and a hobby. And so I was following his rise and the momentum of his campaign versus, you know, Hillary versus Bernie and the DNC and that whole sham. And to me, I was just like, it just like clicked. You know, I volunteered for political campaigns back in Illinois before too. And it's just like, well, make America grateful again.
Yeah.
Like, duh. So I made, I don't know, like, I feel like a lot of people don't realize this. It became so ubiquitous in the scene, like the We're Mayor, Make America Grateful Again. Like, you see that shit everywhere. I'm pretty sure I was the first person to come up with it. And it was funny, is like I didn't really have the angle of like making a ton of cash off it. I really just wanted to like make something and put it into the scene. So I went on
flex that creative gene.
Yeah. It's like I went on Reddit and I just like made a thread. It's like, hey, like I'm gonna print this t-shirt. I'm on the Grateful Dead subreddit. I'm like, I'm gonna print this t-shirt. Do some of you like want to buy it just so I can like cover the cost, you know, just so I can not like lose money on the endeavor? And then so I did that, and I mailed, you know, a couple dozen of them out, whatever, and it had like a really warm welcome. And then whatever handful I had left over, I sold a few. It wasn't like a blockbuster on the lot or anything, but I kind of just picked out like a grassy knoll by Folsom that was pretty close to the house I was living in and just like posted up. And a couple of people came up or whatever, and I sold a few. And I remember, I wonder where he's at now, a really nice gentleman. I remember he was in a wheelchair, like a mobility chair, right? That was motorized. And he was an older guy. You probably saw shows back in the day or whatever. And man, he just loved it. And it just cracked him up. It is just like, that's such a great idea. And I remember talking to this guy and his wife or caretaker, whoever, for a little while. And he bought one. And like, I just remember like that moment was like the moment that I just felt like super like redeeming. And like, I just loved that like that guy had gotten so stoked on something I had made, right? And it just added something to his day. You know, he was having the experience of going to see his favorite band for, whether it's the first time or the 500th time, you know, it was like he was going to the show, and like I made something that was just like a highlight of his day. Yeah. It just cracked him up. He bought one, he put it on right away, and he was in his wheelchair, he's like leaning forward, and his lady caretakers helping get him on and stuff. And like I just remember like the joy that brought me to like see him just have a reaction to something I made. And he's like, man, that's, I don't know if he was a Trump guy or not, or if he, you know, just loved that I just took that angle off of it, whatever. Right. And he just loved it. And that's like, funny. Yeah, at that point I was like, all right, like if I'm going to keep going to shows, I'm going to keep doing this kind of thing.
That's weird. So that day, the Friday they played there, I was in Boulder that day, on the campus, trying to sell some stuff that I was selling at the time. And I was talking to like the maintenance manager of UC Boulder, and he's like, yeah, you coming for the Dead show tonight? And I was like, man, I really would love to, but I don't have a ticket. I was like, really? I don't know where I'm going to park. He's like, yeah, don't come. He's like, he's like, you're not going to find it. He's like, if you don't have a plan already, you're done. Yeah. I was like, yeah, that's kind of where I was at. So I'm probably just going to try to stream it when I get home, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, and I love the Boulder shows. A couple of years I lived in Boulder. I lived in Goss Grove, which is like this really old neighborhood in town. It's kind of between the college campus and downtown. Gotcha. Which the reason I lived there was that exact reason, just very walkable or whatever. But like, I just had this conversation with Leah, who you met last night. It's like when we were leaving Boulder, I was like, man, how often do you get to go like a huge concert like that, like a 30,000 people show, and walk there from your house?
And walk home.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it was, and then walk home after it. I was like, man, that was so great that I got to do that for a few years. And I remember when we signed the lease for the last time we were going to live in Boulder, me and my friends, like, I remember like there was, I didn't really tell them, but it was in the back of my head, like, I have to be in Goss Grove because I want to be able to do that. And I knew like a bunch of guys were going to come stay with me this summer or whatever. And yeah, such an awesome privilege. It's like hang out on the lot for a little while after the show, and like we're not going to deal with the parking lot and driving out of here and like who's sober enough to drive and all this. Sure. It's like, all right, you fuckers ready? Let's walk home. Yeah. Let's get out of here.
Yeah.
It's so cool.
I lived right up the hill from Broncos Stadium when I lived in Denver.
Right,
and, the last weekend that I was in town, I went and saw Sturgill Simpson and Guns N' Roses.
Oh, hell yeah.
I went to go see Sturgill.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, that was Guns N' Roses is cool. Don't get me wrong. I enjoyed the show, but I was there for Sturgill, and again, like you said, it's just so convenient to be able to easily travel back to the house.
Yeah, a lot of fun. It's just like, all right, let's go hang out on the front porch and drink a beer and talk about what we just saw.
Yeah.
A lot of times, you just drive half an hour to the shitty hotel somewhere, and traffic and cops and like all that bad energy that kind of like. It's like, all right, now we got to like behave and settle down and get somewhere safe, make sure everyone gets there and blah, blah, blah. It's like, yeah, it kind of like zaps the energy of the evening, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to just going and sitting on my patios, 4 blocks away.
So at some point you did like get all your shit together per se and make a schedule and line things up, I guess. Did you make some T-shirts in between then, I guess?
So, I mean, I made that campaign tee, and that was, like, the first real, like, dead tee, make it, sell it on a lot kind of deal. And then, like, so I guess I didn't do anything in 2017, but 2018, at this point I had a few contacts in the scene, whatever. And Connor Bradley is the kid that, like, really brought me into, getting relevance in, the social media aspect of it. And he had connected when I went to Fare Thee Well. Snapchat was like the big app of that time. This is 2015, right? So like I'd gone on the Grateful Dead Reddit. So it's like the one place on the internet that I went for Grateful Dead discussion, I guess. A few other forums that are kind of wacky, whatever. And I just used that one whenever I needed to. Posted on there like, hey, I'm at the shows. I understand there's a lot of people that want to be that aren't here, right? So I was like, add me. I'm Solome on Snapchat. Add me, and I'll post stories all day until my phone dies. I just wanted to give people a sight into it, right? That couldn't be there. And Connor was one of the guys that had caught that. And it was funny because Connor told me, he's like, I never even used Reddit at that time. He was like, I was literally just online searching for people that were at the shows that would be posting or streaming, and just like, how can I like soak up as much of this as I can without being there, right?
Yeah.
And he had found my thread. He had added me. And so he had, watched that whole weekend or whatever. And then, like I said, shortly thereafter, I moved to Colorado. And like once in a while, I would post something and Connor would reply to it and whatever. And then Connor actually, I remember when I was heading to Lot with those We're Mayor, Make America Grateful Again shirts, Connor messaged me and he was like, yo, I didn't realize you actually made like Lot shirts and stuff. He was like, are you on Instagram? And I was like, yeah, like I am. I don't really use it that much. Same name, Solome. Like I don't post that much on there. So Connor was like, add me. And then kind of like slowly unfolded like how large this whole thing was just on social media, right? So then, like I said, 2017, I didn't really make anything. I think I still had a couple of those tees left over that I brought with me and sold on the lot that year too. But then 2018, I made that shirt, Almost Ablaze. And throughout the creative process, I was kind of snapping again to Connor and just kind of bouncing off of me. And he was just giving me so much enthusiasm and hype over. He's like, dude, this could be really good. He's like, I'm loving where this is going. This is fucking fire, dude. Keep up, like finish it, like do it. And God bless Connor, because like he's really the reason why I was able to finish that shirt. And I think he was like really to become relevant, like and to become cool, it really just takes one cool person liking your thing to just totally change the tide for someone as an artist. It's like I think a lot of people that struggled, and not even just Grateful Dead bootlegging, but this is just art in general and creative stuff. People that are struggling to break through, it really just takes like one person that's an established, authority
Right.
in some way to just say like, this is cool. And then a bunch of other people see it and say, oh, that is cool, whatever. Yeah. So I think that's what happened. And I made that t-shirt and I sent it to Mason from the lot, and he posted it. And like in the first hour of that post on From the Lot being live, like I know this sounds like over the top and corny, but it's like my life changed forever. It's like everything changed, and like I was just getting messages like nonstop. And I think this was like when the hype around this kind of like bootlegging stuff was like really picking up steam, because John Mayer was starting to wear things that people had made. It's like, so now you had this guy who's playing in the band, and he was a fashion and a culture icon on his own before that. And it's kind of this merging of cultures, whatever, where now he's driving a lot of hype and a lot of fashion excitement, news, whatever, around people that he's picking out of the scene. So it's like, that's all happening. And then I came in with just like a different angle than I think really anyone had really explored before, with this like old style Western movie poster thing. And for me, like the Grateful Dead's music had always existed like that in my mind. And it's like, the word is vignettes, and it's like if you watch like the Ballad of Buster Scrooge on Netflix, it's like vignettes are like a series of short films that are presented episodically, and it's sometimes they all kind of relate to each other, sometimes they don't, whatever. But the music of the Grateful Dead had always kind of existed like that in my mind. Yeah. And I mean, a lot of the story songs, talking about like Jack Straw, talking about like Wharf Rat, and talking about, these other tracks where it's like, it's very literally like a story being told. Black Throated Wind and songs like this, where it's like
That's what I love about like Me and My Uncle. Like
Me and My Uncle,
one of my favorites.
Yeah, spoiler alert, but that's my next shirt. It's a little story song, right? And a lot of them are kind of like old Western tales and outlaw ballads and stuff like that, especially Bobby's tracks, and a lot of even like the San Francisco stuff. And at that time in the early 1900s, where the band was drawing a lot of inspiration from, California was still the Wild Wild West. It wasn't so modern and gentrified and glamorized like it is now, right? It was still more, they lived on Mickey's Ranch out in the countryside of Marin. It's like that was still a kind of a cowboy type area north of San Fran there. So it's like that. The music always existed like that for me. So for me to make that shirt came very naturally, and like it just populated itself in my mind. It just came to be. It just existed, and like to me that idea was a no-brainer. Yeah. So when I think about that, I have to think that like a lot of people probably had that thought. It's like whether or not they had really, came upon the music in that sense, and like this is like an old Western movie presented, in 3.5 minutes of singing and maybe 10-15 minutes of jamming on top of it, but like, I think it just made sense to people, and it's like that is like a very Grateful Dead thing. It's kind of like this old Western outlaw, whatever, and it's like Robert Hunter and John Perry, like they wrote so well to that, telling these little mini stories. And I think it's a lot of time it's like it's all in like accepted canon. It's like there's like this alternate universe or reality where you live inside the catalog of Grateful Dead songs, and all these things are happening. Brown Eyed Women is happening in Bigfoot County, which is kind of like the Mendocino, Humboldt area of Northern California, where all the redwoods are and stuff, and then Me and My Uncle is happening, South Colorado, West Texas bound, stopped over in Santa Fe. It's like these things are all happening, and it's like it's kind of like this alternate, like I said, reality, this different timeline that when maybe you take LSD and you go to a show and you kind of like shift yourself into that. Yeah. And it's like you go into this make-believe world that's being narrated by the songs, and like you're living in this. And so for me to make that shirt, and Fire on the Mountain too, it's like it's not so much of a cowboy song or whatever, but like that song in particular had always stuck with me. Like I said when I was explaining, Winterland and my first real revelation with live Dead music. And like some of the mastery of the lyrics of the Grateful Dead for me have been that like you can take an entire song and it's a beautiful masterpiece. It feels like lyrically, you can whittle it down to 2 words in a lot of different songs and stuff that are just so beautifully poetic together. And Almost Ablaze, I think, was like one of the first ones that I really realized was that. And it's like it's alliteration, it's AA, and to me like those 2 words can mean so much. And it's kind of like almost ablaze. Like it's like you're on the cusp of this huge like energy wave.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like something massive is about to happen. You're about to undertake something. You're about to go on a journey or accomplish some feat or something. You're almost ablaze. I mean, you're almost on fire. You're almost, you know, spontaneously combusting because you have all this energy built up and there's this momentum behind you and something's going to happen, right? And it's like almost ablaze and still you don't feel the heat. I mean, you're just on a blistering trail towards something. You know, it's like that lyric has just always been like a for me. It's like really stuck with me throughout the entire, you know, lifespan, my entire timeline of, you know, living my life with the music of the Grateful Dead. And it's funny because so I made that, and, you know, and that t-shirt launched me into relevance into this, you know, 24/7 year-round digital Grateful Dead lot. And it's so like poetically perfect to me that like that shirt, those two words kind of was that momentum for me. It's like almost ablaze. So now I've made a reputation for myself and I've built a portfolio and I have like an aesthetic in the stuff that I design, and like that really kicked it off for me. You know, so that all happened in 2018, and I had people you know, start to reach out to me like, wow, I just really love this shirt. And a couple of the first people that did were Daniel Shapiro, the photographer, Adam Spangler that runs the Rucka Rucka Ranch account, Daniel Merton, he's Dobar Daniel on Instagram, and Brett, who we've talked about is the Widespread kid, right? And it's really funny because these guys have become like, you know, instant best friends of mine in the scene for sure. And, you know, we promote each other's work and we have similar styles and some of the stuff we make, it's all very unique to our own selves. But I think in the bigger picture, it's like it all has some relevance to each other. And it's funny because, and I've discovered this a lot with Grateful Dead obsession and with music in general and kind of people, it's like instant good friends with these people. It's like when you have a very deep appreciation of this music and you have, you know, you live a life that kind of revolves around it in some way, some people more than others and in their own ways or whatever. It's like you kind of, it attracts people of a very certain brain wave, and everyone kind of has a similar sense of humor and a very similar way of thinking about things a lot of the time, I think. And it's like a lot of similar unrelated interests too. You know, there's a lot of photographers in the scene that are just really good at that. There's a lot of like car nuts in the scene, a lot of people that love, you know, mountain activities and stuff. And I'm all of those things. So it's really easy for me to make friends in the scene because regardless of the music, like that's just like step one. That's like the baseline. That's like the initiation phase. And then you kind of build upon that and you realize you have all these like same obsessions and interests with these people. And it's like, kind of makes you wonder, like, you know, what is it about the Dead's music and what is it about LSD and what is it about this, you know, microeconomy that exists around both and stuff that like really draws those people in. But it's funny, I remember those four guys are the first ones to like really reach out, and it's like I launched that t-shirt online, you know, got on from the lot, started taking orders for it, and I went to Toledo for work, and I was working for, by extension, working for Jeep at this time. And I remember just like sitting on the Jeep assembly line, the Wranglers are going by, we're assembling, I'm kind of supervising as the tops are being installed on them. And it's like, you know, these guys just kept messaging me and stuff. Then we started having conversations about things beyond just the t-shirt I made. And I started asking them about their stuff that they had made and talking to them and like realizing, I was like, man, I've just been talking to these guys like on the Instagram DMs for a couple days. And like all of a sudden they feel like best friends that I've had forever.
For sure.
And it was just wild. And, you know, those guys, each one of them has become a constant in my journey in this, the last 2 years, getting a lot more into it. And like I said, just vibing off the energy of what everyone's creating and promoting each other's work, and it's just nuts. And I had this like nucleus of friends, you know, and Connor's still in it by extension. And we have all these other friends. We have Jake that runs Lazy Lightning Dyes has come into this broader circle and stuff. So now we have, you know, the master tie-dyer of the scene. And it's really funny how you just all of a sudden just become friends with people. It's like, man, I love the shit you make. I love the shit you make too. It's like, what else do you like? Oh, it's all the same shit that I like. Like, wow, that's hilarious. It's like, where have you been for the last 29 and a half years of my life? It's like, I feel like I've known you that whole time, but I just met you yesterday. It's just absurd.
That's funny.
Yeah.
But when did you start dying? Like, had you practiced before this, or?
I've done it a few times, like in middle school and high school, just like school projects or whatever,
Yeah.
and just like, you know, giving it a whirl, and just bought some like corny like all-in-one kit from Michaels, or right. But when I made that tea, one of the ways that it existed to me before it was even like a physical thing was like, I need to make dyes that look like fire or whatever.
Yeah.
This one's a little washed out or whatever, but like when I first did it, I was like thinking, I was like, okay, I just want it to look like flames, you know. And so I kind of thought about the color palette, and I started just like literally just, you know, Googled and YouTubed, you know, different dye styles and stuff, and like, you know, what's a way that's you can make to get good results without you know, having a ton of technique or experience, right? And like putting all that effort into it. And so I just discovered ice dyeing. And to me, like, that style just kind of like appealed. Like, I've never, this is no disrespect to Jake, who I just mentioned or anything, but like the super symmetrical dyes, they just like, they don't like, I don't know if it's like I have an astigmatism in my eyes, so I don't know if I just like don't like looking at it or something, or if I just like, I'd never liked things that were like super cleanly symmetrical. Like, that just didn't appeal to me. It's not something I would wear. And like, there's some beautiful ones out there. Jake makes them, other people make them, they exist, and they're phenomenal to look at. But I just like, I would never wear that. You know, it's like, for me, like just like the messy all over kind of dye was just what made sense to me. So I found the ice dye method that produced those more randomized results or whatever. And I just watched a few videos or whatever, and I kind of like came up with the way that I wanted to do it. And I just did. And that was that. And just kind of did it a few times. And the first few times I overdid it, like on purpose. Like, I would dye the shirt on one side, flip it over, and then like do another layer. So some of the very first ones I ever made are just the wildest, because there's so much color depth to them and stuff. And then like other ones, like I got lazy, or I tried something else, or I was, you know, just like in a different, you know, physical circumstance, and like, you know, where I was making this stuff. So there's like a lot of like variation, whatever. But Brad, again, one of my best friends, this guy up here, he has like the very first one I made, I gave to him. And it's just a bonkers dye that like really looks like it's fire and stuff. And it's like, that was like the one I put on Instagram, and people are like, wow, these dyes are insane. It's like, I feel bad that like, it's just, like not everything ended up looking like that. You know, it's like, I try to get more consistent with it, whatever. But yeah, I don't know, it just kind of became my style. And you know, I worked with this kid Lotus. He's a Denver local, and he does both. He does, you know, the pattern dyes and the random ice dyes, and he kind of taught me his method of tying them up, you know, with yarn, and like if you keep it tight, you know, you get like a cleaner result, whatever. So kind of picked that up and trial and error, figured things out here and there, and it's kind of cool. Like, I stick to the earthy colors, the fiery colors, or whatever, because that's just like my brand now. You know, so I think that's kind of important, is to, when you're doing this, you know, there's so many people that are making things and participating in the scene in some way. And it's like, to really, you know, it's like with any branding and any marketing in the real world, you know, it's like you want to create a consistent image and make something that people see it. If they see it from 100 yards away and they just see someone walking by with a t-shirt on, like, they know who made it just from there. It's like when they see that all over Dice Style, and they see like the very earth tone colors and stuff, like you could see that t-shirt from far away and know that I probably made it or someone knocked me on it. You know, it's like that kind of works for me, and I like that about it. And it just kind of ties everything I make into like a bigger picture and like kind of a broader portfolio, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And it seems like most everybody's kind of fallen into that, you know? Nothing Shaken and NOLA, you know, that they seem to have their own brands.
You
style of doing
master
things.
an aesthetic. And you know, I remember having this conversation with Adam with Rucka Rucka on the way home from New Year's this year. He's like, you ever notice how like when you release something, like half the people that buy it are the same people every single time? It's like whatever you make, like when you really, you really mint your own kind of style and your own approach and your own aesthetic, like there are people that were like looking for that all along that you didn't know about. Like there's 300 million people in this country. You know, there's a million people that probably like the Grateful Dead in this country. You know, there's so many of them. They're still selling out stadiums at this point. You know, it's huge. So there's so many like niche like interests and styles and stuff that people dig. So like if you really come out and make something, like I guarantee you there's 100 people somewhere that have always wanted that, you know, that have always had your obsession with whatever it is, old Western movies or NASA or Land Rovers or, you know, Eastern European war history or whatever. There's people that love that and love the Grateful Dead, and like you just like mastered a niche for them that they've been waiting for their whole lives. And those people will be your repeat customers every single time. And I have people that that own both of my big Western movie T-shirts. And the moment I released the second one, the August West one, a lot of the people that had bought a shirt for me the year prior were like, thank God, like I was waiting, like this is beautiful. Like I couldn't wait to see what you made next. It's like, I got to add it to the collection or whatever. And it's like, becomes like a revolving door of like fans and they become friends and like start talking to these people all the time and in the DMs, and then you meet them in real life. And it's just like, it just keeps growing. And it's like, you become like your own tiny little niche, little sub brand of this bigger bootleg culture. Whatever. It's half the fun for sure.
So I guess you talk about that friend group. Is that y'all started initiating a conversation about going on tour, I guess?
Yeah. I realized this was a big nationwide tour, and there's a West Coast leg, short break, a couple shows in the Midwest, and then the big East Coast ripper, before coming back to Dallas and Boulder, talking about 2019 summer tour here. And, Brett, still in college, he's between his junior and senior year at this point, and still has, he's working, and he works for this marketing company or whatever, but he still has the freedom of a college kid at the same time. Yeah. So he wanted to hit as many shows as possible. And I had, friends that were doing, my friend Jeff in San Jose, Injured Potato, he was pretty committed to doing the entire West Coast thing. So Shoreline,
Injured Potato.
Yeah. His Xbox gamer tag from 15 years ago. It's still his Instagram name. And so he was talking about, just doing the whole West Coast. So San Fran, the Bay Area down to Hollywood and up to the Gorge. Chicago was home for me. So it was kind of fun because this tour really worked out that I kind of got to piece it together and join certain people. And I didn't drive my own vehicle on the entirety of it until we got back here to Boulder, and I was giving Beth a ride to the lot. I hadn't touched my own vehicle in that whole month and a half, right? Yeah. So I rode with Jeff on the West Coast. Adam dropped me off at Portland. Jeff dropped me off at Portland after having lunch with Adam.
Let me stop you just a second. Yeah. I guess, can you, how did you get to the point where you were able to go on tour?
Work sucks. I'm going on tour.
Yeah. But you kind of dropped everything, right?
I did. Yeah. I was at that job where I said I was working for Best Top, right? Indirectly working for Jeep. And it was a good job in a lot of ways. And I had a lot of respect for my boss and the people I worked for and stuff. But I felt, and I think my boss, Joe, and everyone kind of realized I was kind of plateauing there. Mm. And the company was in a place where it was kind of not recreating itself, but kind of figuring itself out for the next generation. The JL Wrangler was brand new, and marketing has taken this big turn in the past couple of years where it's all a lot of people are pumping money into the influencers and to the grassroots things and whatever. So, and the CEO, this gentleman John, very intelligent guy, came from GM, whatever. I wasn't really digging where he was going with it, and putting a lot of effort into the marketing side of things, and the effort put into the product development and the sustaining quality side of things, which is where I worked. I was on the manufacturing side of things, was kind of waning and kind of being sacrificed for volume and for, time to market. And it was just very hard to work in that environment, whereas my job was being sidelined for how quickly can we produce this, how quickly can we get to market. Gotcha. So I kind of just got burnt out of it, and I was like, all right, so I need to pivot in my career a little bit if I'm going to stay upwardly mobile and whatever. And like I said, it started with sitting with David on the cement blocks in Chicago at the Rat Dog show in probably 2000 whatever 10 12 whatever tour that was. Yeah. And just having that idea, I want to do this once. This is becoming for me a bucket list item. And now that I kind of had the momentum behind me, now that my bootlegging career was almost ablaze, I realized I could make enough money to sustain that. Yeah. And just become, have a cash only, survival existence for a summer was plausible. Yeah. And I had the momentum behind me to do it. So I realized that it was just kind of a convergence of timelines for me. I was okay, I'm considering leaving my job at Best Top. I'm considering trying to, establish myself more in this in this Grateful Dead subculture and make something of this. And I'm enjoying doing all of it, and not just making the t-shirts, but like the behind the scenes and stuff. I think a lot of people just know me from making just ridiculous Instagram stories all the time.
Yeah.
And it's like, man, I could go on tour and do both of those things, where
Right.
I could be taking as many photos and videos as I can from the road while, you know, debuting and selling my designs and meeting other people that I've found very interesting or influential in some way, and, you know, combining energy with them. I realized like it was now or never. And it's like, we had this lease. I was pretty cash positive at the time, you know, from working and from bootlegging and everything. And I was like, I realized I could easily sustain myself for the summer. Tour was ending in Boulder right about the time that, you know, my lease would be expiring. This is July, right? So it was like, it was all very just like serendipitous timing.
Yeah.
And I was like, I didn't really even make, like, I had the idea in my head, and the ideas and momentum were building, but I didn't really even commit to it until like a few weeks before. And I went and sat down with Joe at work, and I told him, I was like, hey, I got to do something else for the summer. Like, I think I'm heading out. And he understood. He got it. And I told him, I was like, I'm going to go be a cowboy, like one way or another. And, you know, like metaphorical cowboy.
Yeah.
And so I did. And so, you know, wrapped up my job there. I guess this was like, mid-late May, because tour started the last weekend of May. 31st, I think, was the first show. So yeah, wrapped up my job, and it was an easy way to ease into tour, because my sister lives in Silicon Valley there, and she's just a 15-20 minute drive from Shoreline.
Nice.
Shoreline's kind of nestled behind Google's HQ, so that's where that's all going down these days. And
Gotcha.
her husband works for Apple, and so I had a place to stay. And I'd been talking to Dude In a lot, because they had launched their shop and their brand in Japan,
Right.
December of that prior
Very
year.
cool stuff.
Yeah, very cool stuff. So I'd been, and that to me was just something else entirely, that we were getting our creations on display and for sale, like, what is it, 5,000-6,000 miles away, like on the other side of the planet.
Yeah.
Like that for me was just nutty in its own sense. And that's like, that was like one of those moments where you feel like it really made it. And it's like, dude, it's like something I made is on sale in Japan right now at this boutique little shop that focuses on, you know, the Grateful Dead and, you know, American rock and roll culture and American fashion. And like, to me, that was just so cool. So I spoke to those guys, and they said, hey, we're coming to San Francisco. And I was like, well, hold the phone. Like, I want you to have like a real genuine American experience, and I want you to feel super welcome. And I don't want you staying at, you know, whatever the most affordable hotel is in fucking Mountain View or Saratoga or San Jose. You know, it's a very expensive area to visit and to live in. I was like, yeah, let me talk to my sister for you and see, because they have, you know, this beautiful house as a nice guest suite and stuff. And her husband is from Europe, and they bought this house on the context that they wanted to have lots of visitors from all around the country, all around the world and stuff. So I called my sister, and she was like in the car on the way to the airport. They were going somewhere else, and she was like, yeah. And I was like, friends from Japan, like, haven't met him yet, like, talk to him all the time online. They're like, they're artists, they own stores. Like, yeah. And she was like, I feel like she wasn't even like that present in the conversation. She's got 2 teenage kids. They're on the way to the airport. She's like, yeah, that's fine. I was like, okay, so me and Brett are coming too. She's like, yep. She's like, so like what, 4 or 5 of you? I'm like, yeah. And like, I was like, okay, bye, click. And like, I just remember being like, okay, cool. I guess I'm putting this together. And so I told Taka and Masayuki, I'm like, yeah, you guys are invited to come stay with us. You know, and that ended up being the big kickoff for the whole tour. And I remember, man, so much energy swelled on that weekend, because for multiple reasons. And for one, I mean, just tour was beginning. Everyone was stoked. It was summertime. Dead and Company, like, here we go. But a lot of people reached out to me, like, when they realized that Dude In was crashing with me in my family's home, like, reached out and they're like, dude, thank you so much. Like, that is so cool that they're going to get to come here and meet a bunch of people, and that you know, welcome them with open arms and stuff. And I got, you know, we didn't charge them anything cash wise. They brought so many gifts. I gave them a bunch of shirts and other stuff I had to take back to their shop and stuff. But the way that they paid me back, and it really set my summer alight, was Mayer was following them at this point. John Mayer was following their Dude In page, and I think Mayer had picked up that they were in the US, that they had come for the shows or whatever. So he was watching their stories like just vigorously, and I think you know, Mayer himself was getting amped up and, you know, really getting in the zone for tour or whatever. So like that day and a half leading up to those shows, every time they posted something, John was like one of the first people to watch what they were watching it. I remember Taka would come over, and it's so funny because, you know, the English was so, and we were doing our best to communicate it. And he would come over and he would like unlock his phone and be like, see it. And me and Brett are like, oh my God. It's just so funny. And Taka is such a sweetheart, and it just like his excitement and stuff. And it's like, it was so cute to watch him have to boil his overwhelming excitement down into like 2 or 3 words that he could confidently say in English.
Right,
you know?
right.
And like so much of what he said was like that. It was so wonderfully endearing. So Taka reposted the poster I made, the Back to the Dead tour one, and John saw it right away, and John reposted it. So that was my first appearance on Mayor's Story. And like that just really set things off, because that was just like another like 400 people that were watching my stories. Now just like a little boost, and a lot of people on tour, whether even if they saw like my particular page or knew who I was or not, would be like walking by us and shakedown and be like, this is the poster that Mayor posted, whatever. So that came back, and I made friends just from that particular instance that met up with later on tour, and then became friends with in real life. This ridiculously cute girl from India was brand new in the US, was staying in LA and was coming out to the shows in Boulder, and like had gotten really into the music of the Grateful Dead. And I think she was like one of the people that coincidentally had loved the Dead and had loved Mayor, just like Jeff, Injured Potatoes, like 2 separate obsessions in their life that just like happened to converge in the most perfect way. So I met Viddy, and like it really just like unraveled my summer in such a phenomenal way. Just like that weekend, you know, just Shoreline, get everything going. Got to spend all that time with Taka and Masayuki, and Brett was there, and Jeff lives in San Jose, so he was there, and it's like that was just the kind of like convergence of all of that. Spoke with John a little bit, and like my one claim to fame, I haven't like told like a lot of people about this, but it's something like really hold close to my heart, is like I was the last person that John texted before he took the stage at night 1 of Shoreline.
Wow.
Because he had said a few things, and, you know, Shakedown was taking off. So I wasn't like, we weren't messaging back and forth and stuff. And then, so I finally got a chance to reply to what he had said to me earlier in the DMs there. And I said something, and I just said like, I was like, John, thank you so much. I was like, at this point, like, you're the reason that we get to keep doing this. And like, you know, the energy that you're bringing to this whole bootleg scene, and just all the creativity of it, and like not just the show itself, like you're phenomenal, but I mean, we're doing all this, and like the energy you're putting into it, it matters. Like, thank you so much. And I remember like we were standing in line to get into the venue, and that was a kind of a cluster all on its own, and phone buzzes, and I look down, and it's John, and he's like, damn dude, like thank you so much, like that was the perfect thing to read before taking the stage. And like I'm reading that, and I'm just like, it's really just like taking me over emotionally. And then all of a sudden you just like hear the stage like turn on, and you hear them like put the guitars on, and I was just like, I was like, holy shit, like that just happened. Like he probably like messaged me, set his phone down, did the quick huddle, and then walked out on stage. I was like, man, that's so fucking cool.
That's
and
crazy.
We busted in, and we missed like the first opening track because they're just the chaos of getting the venue. I think it was Bertha or whatever, but it was like, oh my God, I was like, that just like that whole tying together, like that whole moment too, it was just like freaking phenomenal. It was funny too, because I had like a year before that, I had a picture of the Almost Ablaze t-shirt that Andy Cohen had come out and grabbed one for me on lot, and came out and grabbed a bunch of stuff from a bunch of us on lot. And I remember him, Andy had DM'd me a few times after that and told me, he's like, John really loved that shirt and whatever, and never spoke John one-to-one about that one in particular. But I remember when he DM'd me back, and then could see like the prior tags that I'd done from, you know, the summer before. I remember him complimenting it too. He's like, I didn't realize you're the guy that made the old Western movie tees. He's like, dude, those are phenomenal. He's like, thanks so much for like, you know, for doing your side of it, you know, for putting back into the culture as much as you do.
Yeah.
So it was a really wonderful experience talking to him, and it was short-lived. Next day I told him something about like how phenomenal the Hurts Me Too was from that show, and he's like, yeah, thanks. So he really just got into that one, whatever, and I never really spoke to him again after that. But it's really just like that whole culmination of energy right there was just like, again, just like the next big momentum push that kind of you know, set me going.
A hell of a way to start the
tour.
Like,
for sure.
That's
For sure.
That's incredible. So you continued on after that, obviously, and
Yeah. So yeah, I finished the West Coast at the Gorge. Met a lot of people.
how's the Gorge? It's somewhere
It
I've always wanted to go.
it's beautiful. It's kind of funny. I fucked up. So Jeff is a bit of a rail rider, and he loves to get up close and personal to shows. And he has, there's people that do that at most shows or every show, right? And you kind of like get familiar with those people. So Jeff stubbed me down that first night at the Gorge, and I very quickly realized, like, man, I really fucked that one up, because when you're front and center, I mean, the stage is in front of you, and they have, the stage is very 3D. There's these huge trusses, right? And there's the lights and everything. So you couldn't really take in the whole landscape, which is, you go to Gorge for the landscape. And if you go to the show at the Gorge, anyone who's listening, just go sit on the lawn. Like, you don't want to go in the pit there. And the show was great, and it was, it's always like a very involving experience to be that close to what's happening. You see a lot of the nonverbal communication in the band. You see some of the behind the scenes action, and you get to watch them huddle up, between sets, or, before the encore or whatever. And it adds a layer to the experience. But like at the Gorge, you really want to sit on the lawn. So night 2, I was on the lawn there, and I was with the Massey brothers, and I was with Mattingly, and I was, Tim Miller was there, and it was like, all the East Coast fam they don't get to spend a lot of time with, because I'm one of the West Coast guys, whatever. So we were all huddled up on the lawn there, and it was just a phenomenal experience watching. You're looking kind of northwest from that perspective, I think. So the sun's setting behind the Gorge Valley behind it, and it's just this massive vista. It's literally a gorge, a big canyon river thing going on behind it. And it's super beautiful. And it's cool. It's like, the lot kind of happens 24/7 for however many days you are there, because everyone's camped out. And shakedown kind of happened at the back of this one piece of the big circle campground area right there at, 11 o'clock. Depends on how you're looking at it, I guess. So we, just got to meet my friend Jeff, who is someone who had bought, like an early adopter of Almost Ablaze that I'd talked to a lot. And he's another guy, like, same thing, he's obsessed with snowboarding and rock climbing, and it's like lives over in Salt Lake. And it's like, I meet this guy, and I meet Jake that runs the Lot Mart account, and we were vending with him and his little posse of Seattle guys. And really got to, and like I said, a lot of the East Coast fam was there too, and hung out with them. And really just, it was a really good little melting pot. And because it's kind of all contained there and everyone's camping in the same area, really just get to interact with a ton of people. The guys that run the No Simple Road podcast were just a few camping spots down from us, and they were doing a live podcast at one point, and we weren't on it, but we were just walking by and like waving as they were doing their thing. And it was cool. Really cool little, and it's in the middle of nowhere. So I mean, it really becomes like its own its own little thing when a show and an event is happening like there.
On mini economy.
Its own little micro economy, and it's all right there. And then it's a long ass walk to the venue from there, but it's funny. It's like gets like progressively more beautiful as you go, and it's like even from like the first gate into the actual venue is like a long ass walk compared to most places. Usually it's like first gate, then you're kind of in, and it's like, the first beer vendors are there, and participation row is there. At the Gorge, I mean, you walk like another like half mile, and like go down to this like little low point. There's like a little lake there, and it's like the sun is kind of getting a little bit lower, and it's golden hour at that point. It's just like, wow, it really like sinks in like geographically where you're at. And then you get into the venue for real, and you just kind of crest over onto the lawn, and it's like then the view hits you for real, and it's like, oh my god, like this is its own little piece of heaven. It's kind of cool. It's like the very top of the lawn, there's just like a line of trees all the way across, and like the one like main like asphalt pathway connecting to all the restrooms and beer and food vendors or whatever. So we kind of that second night just sat right at the top there, kind of close to everything. And it was so fucking cool. It got cold. I remember I borrowed Mattingly's sweatshirt that he was wearing, that tied around his waist, and almost didn't give it back to him. He had to like fight me for it because it was such a cozy piece, and kind of became for me like that, part of that whole show and experience. Just kind of like grabbing something off my friend's back and wearing it, most literally, and just kind of like the whole Grateful Dead experience, I guess.
Yeah. So from there, you continued on, I guess, and
flew home to Chicago.
I was about to say there was a little bit of a break at that point.
Yeah, it was super nice. I went home to the suburbs and stayed in my childhood bedroom, and that was kind of like another, homecoming, literally event for me. And then midweek, I drove down and did the one night off at Deer Creek, which is now Home Mortgage Center or whatever, all these corny corporate names. My friend Ryan that I mentioned way back when in this conversation about like Mayer, the Chappelle Show experience and stuff.
Right.
Ryan lives down in Indy now, and he's lives in the just north of Indy, so he's like not far from Deer Creek at all, and really cute little old house with his expecting wife and stuff, and he has a work from home job. So he's like, all right, like I can do a late start tomorrow. It's like a Wednesday show. He's like, let's fucking do it. So he went and he's always been in a band. He's in a band now. He said he's never been super into the Dead, but a couple of his bandmates are.
Yeah.
So they play some tracks. I think they play Scarlet Fire, and they play Estimated, and they play whatever else. So he knows these, and he plays lead guitar on them, so he's very familiar with these songs. And he wanted to see Mayer's live interpretation of it, you know, just to kind of like amp him up and get him in gear. Even though he's not obsessed with it, he's still a part of it.
For sure.
So he went, we had a great time, and a lot of funny shenanigans on the lawn there. This poster that I have was a ground score on the lawn at that show.
Oh, wow.
Me and Ryan are standing there, and if we're having a good time, we're partying and stuff, but we both had driven, so we're not getting shit canned, we're not doing drugs, anything.
Yeah.
And there's these guys next to us that were just like, the one dude in the group was like literally one of like the drunkest people I've ever seen that was still like somehow functioning. He was upright kind of, and he was like the drunkest dude ever, and he was talking loud and getting like not respecting people's space and stuff. So at one point his friends were like, all right, fuck it, we're done here, and friends kind of dragged him out of there. I think that was his poster, and they just left it there. And Ryan nudged me, and he's like, there's a poster tube. He's like, do you want to see what's in it? I was like, kind of. I was like, well, and I'm not one to just like, take something, just write off someone like that. So we just kind of shifted over to their spot, and I stood with it between my legs in case one of his homies came back and realized like, hey, did someone drop a poster tube here? Probably spent whatever $75 that cost. Yeah. So we just guarded it till the end of the show, and they never came back. So I was like, all right, it's mine now. Yeah. So I took it back to Ryan's house and like unwrapped it, and his wife was in the kitchen. It was like the big reveal and stuff. We're like, what is it? And like, sure enough, it wasn't even the show specific poster, but the whole tour one. Okay. Which was amazing because I was like, I'm doing this whole tour. Like, what a nice little souvenir to bring home. So I left it, went back to Chicago, and the next day I left it at my parents' house. My mom took care of it for me and brought it out to Colorado after tour wrapped up.
Nice.
Then we had the Wrigley shows, and Nola that you mentioned, he's another Alex. He was coming to town for that, so he actually came out to the burbs and stayed a night with me at my parents' house. My mom made us breakfast. She got to know Alex a little bit, and
nice.
He had some contacts too because he's from Baton Rouge, right? Hangs out in New Orleans a lot. My second oldest brother lives down right by New Orleans, on the Gulf Coast there. So he had some familial contacts there. That was cool. And the playing wise, I think musicianship and show energy, I think Chicago was kind of the best that we had it for that whole damn tour. And again, we were with Brad, so that was another big full circle thing. Getting back on the tour with Brad again, and he met Alex, and they clicked, they hit it off, and we had a really good time that weekend together. And I got to see David, who has been a recurring character in my Grateful Dead timeline. He lives in the city, so I stayed with him and my good friend Cass. And Cass is he's one of the kids who was in the hardcore bands that we were seeing in high school, right? So he was kind of a later adopter of the Dead. He was always really big into Dylan, Bob Dylan. Mm-hmm. So he kind of came into it from that angle and wasn't ever like the big jam band guy, but a lot of his good friends were me, and he was living with David at that time in the city, and one of his best friends, Calvin, who was up in Portland. He was a huge fish head and stuff. So Cass had always been around it, right? But I think never like really succumbed to it until like, that time, like after college. And then he started collecting all these old folk records and realized that the Grateful Dead were pulling a lot of songs from Dylan and from, old blues, Bobby Bland and bands like that. And like, so Cass kind of like picked up that like every old school artist he got into had some like Grateful Dead contacts in some ways. So just like, he got really into it. And his band, he's a really, really good musician, and he's kind of come into that, that convergence that we're seeing a lot of, like this indie alternative rock thing that blends in with like country folk music and becomes like its own little genre. And like I remember like right after college, like hanging out with him and David in the city, they were like the first people to get like really into Mac DeMarco, and stuff like that, where it's kind of like these, like I said, this convergence of stuff. And Mac is a Deadhead, and he has his own musical style. So Cass has really come into his own, I think, musically in the past couple of years, kind of like in the same parallel timeline with him getting more and more into the Dead. And now, so he's covering their tunes more and more, and he's starting to make t-shirts and drawing a lot of design for his own work off of, Grateful Dead iconography and stuff. So that's really cool. So I hung out with them in Chicago there, and then from there was the big break to the East Coast, and I rode with Fernando and Kyrie out east. And at first, Fernando was like, I just met them at the Gorge, like very new friends. And I just knew who they were prior to that, because Fernando is such a well-known
Don't worry about it.
tattoo artist and a well-known head. And at first, he's like, I can just offer you the ride, can't offer you anywhere to stay when we get to New York or whatever. And then, like, got closer and closer to Buffalo, where he grew up with his mom there. And he just eventually was like, all right, you can stay with us for a couple nights while I figure out the next... our next move for getting to SPAC, I guess, is we're going after that. So I stayed there, and that was a very pleasant, we were quite literally trekking up to Buffalo. And his mom had this, very quaint home in the old part of town there. And it was just very like Americana feeling. And it's like, now we're in the peak of summer. And like, I remember I just had a very like special moment. Fernando was out at the car wash, and Kyrie was repacking some stuff, and I was just kind of like sitting there like on his mom's back porch, like, hanging out with people I just met, like in the part of America I'd never really spent any significant time in. And like, it's a really beautiful moment. Just sitting there, very tranquil. It's just like very like the calm between storms or whatever. And had a beautiful moment with myself right there. And Kyrie had given me one of her dedicated books to thumb through. So I was just drinking a coffee, sitting outside. My phone was inside charging, so I was kind of like disconnected for a moment, which is, pretty out of character for me, I guess. And and just like it really just had like a very special moment to myself that I would never even really be able to put into words or anything, where I just had like a wonderful, wonderful moment of peace sitting there. It was getting to the point where it's kind of like the middle of the tour at that point. It was kind of like, the anticipation was building for the big East Coast. It was like East Coast all kind of happened in one insane week, right? Between, New York and Atlanta. Yeah. And it was just kind of like, the calm, like I said, between storms. I just had that very wholesome, soul-filling weekend at home, hanging out with all the guys that I had initially gotten in this music with, and seeing everyone and a bunch of other hometown friends. Some of them were first timers at shows. My friend Allison is a good friend from my hometown. It's just like jokingly got into the Grateful Dead because like all of her guy friends are into it, and her dad is into it and stuff. She's like, all right, I guess I'll just finally have to surrender and get into this shit or whatever. So she was at the show, first timer and stuff, really cool. And so I just kind of like, having a moment to like collect on all that and reflect and reminisce really just got me like in the zone for East Coast tour. And man, I just from there, I went back to my, again, a recurring theme of like Fernando and Kyrie were picking up Daniel-Mabry, another tattoo guy, and the car was full. They're like, you got to find your way to SPAC, like figure it out, hurry up. It's like, I was like, all right, fuck. I was like, so I just went on Reddit and I was like, hey, I'm overnight in Buffalo staying with a friend. There's no room for me in this car to get to Saratoga. Like, is anyone passing through here on the way? And sure enough, these two heads were kind of like, I think they were trying to hit Niagara or something on their way, and they're just making a thing. They're two college kids taking some time off, doing their own thing. Their names are Mason, and the other kid's name is Jordan, but he goes by Trip Wizard.
Okay.
This is just like, it's like now we're really getting into the thick of it, right? Now I'm getting in a car with someone named Trip Wizard, and that's like literally how he's like, he just called me Trip, and I'm like, that's how he introduces himself. I'm like, holy shit. And two great kids, like super nice, super stoked, and they were doing the entire tour, first timers doing that too, and man, they were so excited about the whole thing. It was really fun because, like I said, they were of the age when I first started like hypothesizing doing that, and they just went and did it. They didn't wait till they were like an adult and just bored of working in a cubicle. They just went for it right away. So linked up with those kids and camped with them at SPAC, and it was really funny because camping next to, tons of people obviously, but wake up the next morning and it's like, so I heard they were talking about me outside the tent. Like I had slept in later, because I always do. Then these guys, and they're talking about me outside the tent. I'm like, I wonder who they're talking to. And it's like one of the guys that was camping right next to us knew who I was, from the gram, and had owned one of my prior shirts. really great kid. His name's Nicholas. He runs the Here and Gone Dead account. He makes really funny stickers that are just really great, like combinations of like old and modern dead culture.
Yeah.
As I met Nick, and like we just hit it off right away, and the kid's tent was like 10 feet from us. He's like, I know you. It was like really funny, just like full circle, like meeting with someone who had, kind of been following my Instagram, rise and adventure so far, and really, really great kids. So we're just like at that point, just camping with all of them, and then Mattingly shows up and camps with us, and just like that was just like another whole thing. And from there, I rode with Ting down to Manhattan, and that's, I don't know, that should be like an episode all on its own. It was like what happened at that point, because like tour took a turn for like the weird at that point, and like the very, very good kind of weird.
Gotcha.
The City Field was an amazing like coming out of culture, and it was a very like who's who, because I mean you're in New York City and you're in the thick of the East Coast, whole scene at that point, and there's a lot of people that have kind of adapted or adopted the Grateful Dead culture in their own way, because again of like this whole hype, this whole like convergence of street culture and pop culture with Mayer, and like tattoo culture with Fernando and Daniel-Mabry and these guys, right? And it's like all these things converge there, because New York City is a cultural epicenter on its own 24/7. That city never turns off. And our friend Isaac had kind of rented an Airbnb on the Lower East Side, and he was also there for work and stuff, so he was kind of comping it all on his own. So it's like, I guess Camden had happened in between that, and I had stayed another wonderful homely stay with Dan Merton and his family in Laurel Springs, New Jersey, and same thing, like cute little hometown USA, like slow down for a moment. So Camden happened, but this is all leading into City Field. And, Brett came and picked up me and Dan, and we went into the city, and we met up with Isaac and his friend John. And it's just like, that's when things just like really like got like big, and you could really just like the energy of like, that was an absolute focal point of all the energy in the whole tour. It really happened on that weekend. It's really a shame it was only one show, because it's like, it's a spot worthy of two. And I think the prior year, 2018, it had been a 2-night run at City Field. But my God, and we sent it pretty hard on some really good acid that evening. And that was actually when I met Connor Bradley for the first time in person. I realized at this point, Connor has been my internet friend for 4 straight years at this point. And we talk a lot. Like another guy that we have a lot of, thoughts and hobbies and perspectives on the world outside of the Grateful Dead scene that are all the same, right? So Connor and I have been talking like probably most days, more than not, sometimes every day, for long stretches of time. And I finally met Connor in person, and me, Connor, and Brett all click as a little trio. So we were hanging out, and like I said, we sent it pretty hard that evening. And that's when John, walked out with Wolf and played Jerry's guitar, which had been on exhibit at the Metropolitan Museum of Art there. And Connor kind of had the tip through the online ceramics guys that was probably happening. And he kind of planted the seed on us, the rumor, like pretty much as we're walking to the venue, and everyone, this is all hearsay, and online ceramics had been at dinner with Mayer the night before, and he had kind of dropped the hint pretty heavy on them, I guess. So it came out, and then sure enough, and I'll never forget walking into the stadium, and we all had floor seats and floor not seats. And and you kind of like, for the floor, I mean, usually you enter like through the concourse of the stadium and stuff, but that wasn't like that at City. It's like you kind of came out almost behind the stage, like right to the side of the stage, kind of like wrapping around, and you pour straight in. So like the way that you're flowing in is you're walking away from the stage almost. Mm-hmm. Well, they hit the opening notes to St. Stephen just as we were kind of like breaching that turn into the stadium. And I remember just like, again, the show started at like 7:40 p.m., which in the height of summer is golden hours. The sun's getting low. The sun's very powerful, and it's a very golden and very orange light. And I remember we're literally turning the corner, walking, and you're starting to take in how massive the crowd is in the stadium. The opening notes of St. Stephen hit, and Dan just, I'm like a little kid, like running to the Christmas tree on Christmas morning, just takes off running and leaping, and he's just like throwing his fist in the air. He's like, let's go. And he's so stoked. And this is Dan with his big curly hair, and the sun's behind him, and we're walking in this massive stadium, and it's just like just pure goosebumps, and like I'm just getting so amped. And sure enough, we finally turn like the other perspective corner, and we're taking these little steps down where you're actually walking into the pit area, and you turn and look, and there's like the big screen, there's the stage, the big screen, and it's just on John's guitar, and he's playing Wolf, and we're like, fuck, like this is ultimate turn on city, and we're coming up real hard at this point. And it was just the energy was just madness.
Yeah.
It was just insane.
Sounds like it for sure.
Yeah, and the first set was so good. The tone out of that guitar with John's playing and John's amplification and Jerry's guitar and just everything, like the biggest, punchiest tone, and I think, John was just turned on to another level of playing on his own excitement, and he was wearing, the dirty black pocket tee and just like really taking on, the character of playing Jerry's role. And I think that's, to Mayor's credit, he's always respected that role so well, and he's never tried to outdo Jerry or overdo himself in any way. He's never like stepped over the line and done or said anything to like that could be considered a threat against Jerry's legacy, because that would, and he has to know this, I mean, that would ruin him in the Deadhead community instantly. Like, people have such an emotional attachment to who Jerry was and the way he played and who he was as an icon and kind of a spiritual guide, that you can't ever expect to like eclipse that or want to overcome that in any way, right? And I think John has done a wonderful job of assuming that role without overstepping his bounds. And I think he got just into character enough that night that it was a sign of respect more than it was anything. And if you read, there's I forget who published it, but there's a magazine article out there somewhere. Dan Shapiro knows where it's at, and it's about John's whole interaction with Wolf as a guitar, and he had played it a year or two prior in some very private setting at a rehearsal somewhere when he was in Los Angeles. The guitar was coincidentally in Los Angeles at the same time. Jay Blakesberg was there, and I think Jay and someone else kind of like said like, hey, I'm going to be taking pictures of Wolf. You're rehearsing in LA that same weekend. We should make this happen. And John played it there and decided he wasn't ready yet to bring it forth, on stage at a real show, whatever. Yeah. So he waited, and he did it at the right time, I think. And the energy at that show was just something else. And just all of the culture clash and the characters, and Brett's younger, and he's got more of an angle on some of this like streetwear stuff that I have. So he's pointing people out that I wouldn't know like who they are without him explaining. And it's like, that person runs this store, this brand, this account on Instagram, whatever. And I'm like, holy shit. Like I would never known that. And we're just like, we're laughing at just like all of the weird character, like idiosyncrasies that are happening around us. And, that was our introduction to Tall Ass Nick, who becomes another good friend of ours and another recurring character in our scene. And oh my God, that show was so good. The Terrapin. I spent a lot of time around Connor at that show, and Connor's beyond his years as like the old wise man at these shows. And I remember him saying at set break, right as the lights start to get darker again, you see the band's coming back on stage. I remember Connor just like lighting up some Palo, looks around, he goes, it's about to get weird. And like, sure enough, man, it got weird in just the right way.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we have so many inside jokes from that day, that evening, that weekend, like everything that happened after the show. You were staying like in Manhattan on the Lower East Side, and we like went out just tripping nuts, like went out for snacks and like just like the things like that we bought at this little bodega, it's like the only 24/7 place in the neighborhood, whatever. Is like the stuff that like we came home with like was like a story all on its own. We're just like we're just laughing so hard, and Isaac's just running the show. We're on the rooftop. It's the middle of the freaking night. There's no sleep to be had. And we're snacking and we're listening to like music on some dinky little Bluetooth speaker, and like the entire Manhattan skyline is in the background behind us. And like, I can't stop dancing, even though it's like 3:00 in the morning. Yeah. It's like whatever comes on, I'm just like, keep on like Oh my gosh.
Yep.
Yeah.
Hard to come down off of that.
Yeah, literally. I mean, I still am today. All this time later, it's like so much of what's happened since all kind of like festered or fostered in that moment, in that New York weekend. It was such a great time. We went out and had an amazing day. The next day, tell us Nick brought us to Nike HQ and, you know, fucking gave us the drip there, and we went out and explored, went to like Isaac and Daniel's favorite little camera shop and like did all this cool New York stuff, whatever. And I don't know how long have we been talking for, like 2 hours.
Almost. Yeah.
Yeah,
just under.
no one's gonna listen to this front to back. It's like, where do they even start?
Well, I think it's really cool because, like, I mean, I guess through you and Connor, and I found Daniel, and like now I get really inspired by Daniel and like the content that he produces and his photography and stuff, and of course, like it's just like you say, it's really cool how, you know, you had to create something and it ended up, you know, you just made a whole bunch of friends because of it, you know?
Yeah, and it doesn't stop. I mean, there's 100 people I haven't even name dropped yet that are just as equally important, a part of this experience for me. And it's like, and it doesn't stop because like we just met in person like this weekend. Now this is a whole new thing. Like now we have each other as friends and as, you know, content producers and as deadheads, and like we're gonna end up keep seeing each other and bouncing things off each other all the time now. Yeah, and I think like the biggest, I mean, if I had to like make a statement or make a case or just, you know, make a point of all of this, and I've tried to do this throughout the course of the conversation, is that what the Grateful Dead fandom has done for me, and I think like the big picture, you know, the bird's eye view of what's happening here, and to just kind of put this into something that someone can chew over, is for me is it makes circles in my life. And like I said, it's like the 4th of July and my friends David and my friends Brad, you know, it's like you go like long periods of time without seeing your friends as an adult, right? Your best friends you grew up with. You go long periods of time without seeing your favorite band live in concert, and you go, you know, you have to go back to normal life for a while, and you have to work, you have to have revenue and income, you have to have a healthy diet, you know, like sleep and take care of your pets, and you have to, you know, tend to your life. And what it creates then is like these like circles where, you know, and the Dead's music has done it on its own, just as music, and now these tours have done it in the tours, and the content creation is all made for me, and the friendships have all made these like circles for me, where it's like you go off in time and space and you do your own thing for a while, and then once in a while like everything comes back, and it's like this wonderfully like heart-filling feeling of like homecoming, where it's like I'm going back, you know, stealing back to my same old used to be, where you're getting back to what you really love and like your favorite hobby, your favorite pastime. And it's like this kind of like, you know, it's kind of behind the scenes and kind of secret, because like when you out yourself as a deadhead to your family and to your coworkers and stuff, you know, they think like, oh, this kid, he parties pretty hard. He probably trips out acid. He probably smokes a ton of pot. Like, and however that true or not that might be, it's like, you know, it's like almost kind of like an undercover fandom a lot of the time, like in the real world. And, you know, I've made it so much of a part of my personality and whatever, you know, public and private at this point, that it's less so is now for me. And it's like, I work in the weed industry now, so I don't have to like hide it. But it's really interesting that like, you know, it's like this thing that you come home to, this feeling, this sensation, this like tour after tour, you know, music releases that they do, products and content that your friends creates these circles where you're always coming back to it. And even if you get far away from it in time and in space and in emotion and stuff, even when you get far away from it, something happens, something comes about that drags you back into it, and then you get back into it, and it's like this warm blanket of familiarity, and these friends that, you know, you live in all corners of the country and you only see each other once, twice, maybe 4 times a year, maybe more, maybe less, and it's like it's when you meet up with them, it's all the same thing, and everything else turns off, and you get back into your habits and your hobbies and the things that only exist for you in Dead tours and Dead shows and in the friends you've made along the way there. And it becomes again, when we talk about the lot being its own little microeconomy, its own little world, or the show itself being its own little world, or the fandom itself becoming its own little world, these weekends, these days, these parking lot afternoons, concert evenings, Airbnb, hotel after show, secret parties and hangouts, and my front porch in Boulder, and campsites coast to coast. It's like becomes like its own little world, with its own little cast of characters that you all know and love, and your friends are all these quasi celebrities in this scene, and it's like you're meeting people that are your friends and your fans and your heroes and your inspirations and stuff, and you're all meeting in your own little world and your own little, I keep on using the word context because it's all like a big web of context for who's who and how the music matters to it and whatever. And it's like, to me, that's my absolute favorite part. And it's like, I just love it so much. And now that I have my own real little clique, and there's all these other little cliques that are bridged by certain characters or certain geographic, points of interest or concert venues or, whatever is relevant to a certain time and place. It's like you have all these, like this huge, massive network of friends that keeps growing and it keeps sprouting in different directions, whatever, because of who knows who. And it just becomes this giant web of just hype and excitement and creation and personality and style and content. And it's just like all these things, like all these people, places, all these years combine, right? And they melt into this dream that becomes a permanent, sometimes fixture in your life. And like I said, it's a semi-permanent fixture because you go through, periods of time where you turn it off, and then, a tour gets announced or a New Year's show happens, or someone's favorite cover band is coming to town. They want you to come visit and see it with them. Like something happens where it's just like, boom, and you're right back in it, right where you picking up right where you left off last time. It's like in whatever way that might be for you. And it's just, I don't know. For me, it's like, it's just like a lifetime of discovery, and I have like a lot of confidence that like, if I get married or something, I would not be surprised if I meet my girlfriend, my fiance, my wife, again, if she walks up to me on lot and I'm just standing there and with my homies and we're selling our t-shirts and stuff, and this gorgeous girl walks up, and I don't care if she's with her boyfriend or if she's with her friends or whatever, like I'm going to lay it on, like I'm going to flirt with her and I'm going to introduce her to my portfolio of stuff. I'm going to point out what my friends are selling and be like, this is who we are. And before she gets a chance to walk away, like I'm going to hand her a sticker that has, like at Solome written on the back of it. I'm going to say, hey, follow along if you want to, this is who I am. I'm trying to see all these shows. Yeah. It's like she has the prerogative, the choice at that point to follow or not. But it's like, I'm going to keep doing that until like I meet the love of my life. It happens, until it happens. Or maybe she's a lot artist of her own and I want something of hers or something. We trade something. You never know. It's like, I feel like it's going to go that way at some point. It's going to happen. And it's like, I would love for all this magic and love and excitement and hype and adventure that's happened in my life in the past couple of years. Hopefully it continues and I get to take something very permanent like that out of it with me.
I love it, man. I got two questions.
Go for it.
Do you have any idea how many shirts you've sold?
How many shirts I've sold? Oh man. In total, I really don't. I think about like screen printing receipts and stuff. I think I did 300 something of the August West, I want to say. So I did about 100 pre-orders, and I printed about 200 for tour, and then I did one more short reprint for people that were hitting me up after the fact and like whatever. Almost Ablaze, I want to say there's probably about 150 of those shirts that exist out there. And then like other small, very rare. Yeah, and then other smaller side projects, I did 50 of the Long Distance Runner Club sweaters. I did 22 or so, whatever it was, of my New Year's shirts that are out there now. I've done some stickers and some other small things, whatever. And I don't know. There's a couple hundred of my shit out there.
Fair enough.
Somewhere. And I love it when people go to cover band shows, or maybe they went to a Mayer solo show, or they went to something that wasn't very strictly a Dead show or something, and saw one of my shirts somewhere, and I get super hype on that when people tag me in their Instagram stories or send me a picture of it. It's like, yeah, was just out and about at this concert pregame, and some dude walked in wearing your tee, and like, that's super exciting for me. It's like, the cash comes in and it funds these insane adventures and stuff, but like, I'm not in it for profit at all. It's like, it's not a part of, I don't depend on that for my income or anything. It literally just funds me going to shows and buying flights and tanks of gas, whatever. But like, for me, it's like the real reward of it is just seeing something that I created being appreciated. It's out in the wild and people love it. They wear it and they wear it to shows, and, hopefully they're going to shows and having a meaningful experience and with their friends or their love of the music or whatever. And it's like, wearing that shirt is part of that for them. And it's like, it's an emotional part of the emotional investment that they make for that day. And when they're thinking about that day, and it's like, oh man, we're going to this, whether it's Dead and Company or they're going to see Phil or they're going to just their local, dive bar cover band. It's like, they're getting hype on it and they want to make a statement with what they're wearing. And if they choose something that I made, like, that's such, it's just like that gentleman in the mobility wheelchair at Folsom, one of the first people I ever actually sold a shirt to on lot, and just how like it just sparked his sense of humor and the light in his eyes. And he's like, I got to have that. He's like, what do you want? You want $25 for it? Here, take 30, keep the change. It's like, I want you to be able to go out and do more of this, because it brought me a moment of joy. That's just so fucking rewarding.
For sure. It's funny you say like they want to make a statement and stuff, and that's very much like wearing this in North Louisiana. You definitely get stared at a lot. It throws people off, and it's very outside of the culture there. And
for sure.
You mentioned it earlier. You have an idea for another shirt coming up. You have any ideas to when that will go down?
Yeah. The shirt already exists like 99% in my mind. It's just a matter of getting it down and kind of waiting for the summer tour announcement, and if I want to tie when and where the tour is and kind of the aesthetic of it all. But so I've made 2 of these old Western movie style t-shirts, and a lot of films come out in 3s, right? Trilogies. So I'm going to finish the trilogy this summer with the 3rd and maybe final shirt for that particular style. And like, I already know what song it is. I already know what it looks like. I already know what the font is going to be. I haven't picked out the actual font, but like I said, this all kind of exists in my mind. Right? I just got to bring it to fruition. So there will be a 3rd and final, country Western cinematic shirt. They'll tie the trilogy together, and I think I'll do a poster run where I do all 3 posters, and I want to get it on some really cool vintage looking and feeling stock, and I want it to like look, and I'll do Almost a Blaze, August West, and then, the 3rd one, and I'll make shirts of it too, obviously. And then there's that larger project that I told you about at Sancho's last night. For sure. That's not ready to be announced yet, but there's that as well. And I think that's going to take up a lot of my creative bandwidth and a lot of my portfolio space for this summer. And hopefully it's going to make a lot of money, not just for me, but for the person whose business that it needs to happen for. And hopefully it brings in a lot of creative talent from around the entire scene. And I told you, it's going to be hopefully turn into this big collaborative project that I can get a lot of people participating in. And I think for the person who's going to be the centerpiece of that and the real focal point of it as an artist and as a curator and as a godfather to us all, hopefully it's going to be significant.
And we, like I said, we were talking about it last night, and I don't know all the players in the game that we were talking about, but the fact that you are using what you have built and the relationships that you've created and all this stuff, and you're using it not only to help an individual but to help the culture in general. I think it's going to be hard for people not to get excited about it. It's going to be hard for people to tell no to collaborate with it. I think it's really cool that it's more than a party. You're trying to help people.
It really is. I mean, it's a comprehensive lifestyle, and it's spend as much time sober and productive as you do being a degenerate party animal. And that's part of who I am. not a burnout or a deadbeat in any sense, and no disrespect to people that really go all out on that, but that's not me. I was raised differently, and I have a very productive and active and academic and productive lifestyle, like I said, altogether outside of it. So it's fun for me to bridge the gap and kind of do both. To me, that just makes it so much more of a involving experience, and it helps me bring other people into it that just they just see the party and they think that's all it is, and just people getting super high and listening to like long strung out music. And to me, it's a lot more than that.
For sure.
Yeah, and I hope that this project that we're talking about, like I said last night, and I'll say it again, it's like I hope, like I know it's going to have a lot of excitement and relevance and whatever for people in the scene already, but hopefully it can attract some interest and attention from outside of the scene as well.
Definitely.
And people that are aware of who and what the Grateful Dead is, and know that there's a very exciting art culture around it, but haven't really spent any time around it, or maybe want to see it in a gallery, or would buy something even though they've never had before. They never bought any Grateful Dead merch, or they never bought something off a lot or something, but they'll see it in a new way, in a new light, that'll make them say, hey, you know what, maybe that's a piece of art that would belong in my home, even though I'm not a big Deadhead.
Yeah, definitely. Well, let's wrap it up there, I guess.
Yeah.
Tell the people where to follow
How
you.
do we do on time? That's 2 hours, 6 minutes, 49 seconds.
Yep.
That's amazing.
Yep.
Yeah, major props to anyone who goes fucking
sure.
start to finish on that. I mean, I hope someone does, and I hope someone enjoys it. And like I said, everything that I do, like I just hope to be an inspiration to other people to get more into it, whether it's this music or something else, or like to just really have a passion and just like really, when I keep talking about the circles and in these relationships and in the music and stuff like that, I hope I can help people think like that. And just recognize the cyclical nature of life and of obsessions and of friendships and stuff. And, if you only take one thing from it, for you or for anyone listening, like just try to apply that train of thought to yourself and your life and see what happens.
Yeah. For sure.
We'll see what happens.
Yeah, definitely. So follow along the adventures at Brolome.
At Brolome.
On the gram. And
and soon elsewhere.
Yeah.
It'll be exciting. Yeah. I hope more people come along for the ride.
Definitely.
Thanks for doing your part and pulling all that out of me. And hopefully, we can.
Yeah. Well, thanks for your hospitality and
of course,
allowing me in your home and having a good time last night. So.
Yeah. Thanks for coming to my home.
Yeah. Well, thanks again, and hopefully we can catch up down the road.
Yes, sir. I'll be looking forward to it.
Sweet.